Well, we made it. 50,000 subscribers. And it's been a wild ride. And it's funny because I did a video celebrating 750 subs and then like 10,000. And I actually said at the time that the next time I'll celebrate will be 50,000. And here we are. And over the years, there's been times that I would research some movies and write a script for an episode, but then for one reason or another, I never made that episode. Sometimes I just didn't think there was enough of a catch to the timeline, or I didn't think that the franchise had enough interest to be its own episode, or it was too similar to something else, whatever. Like, I didn't make it. And it turns out that I had a bunch, so I compiled a gaggle of them here. And since I know that you all like it when I do long form videos, to celebrate 50,000 subs, we're talking about 50 different movies. That's right, we're covering 21 franchises from every genre. So sit back, strap in, and let's celebrate. We're starting off with a horror timeline, and it's a mini one as we check out The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And this is one that wasn't an outtake. This is one that I did especially for this video. So let's see if this town has some continuity, or if it dreads it so much it doesn't know what time of day it is. The sun went down in 1976 with The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and we're told that we're 8 months after the war ended, World War II. So that would put us in the earlier part of 1946 then, and we're in Texarkana. And the narrator tells us that we're about to watch a true story. And that's kind of true. Like, there was a series of killings and attacks in 1946 committed by someone called the Phantom Killer that was never caught, and this is a loose adaptation of those events. We're shown one of his attacks, and oh, is that Jason? Well, this is a good 7 or 8 years before old Baghead Jason would appear, and it's largely thought that his sackhead look was inspired by this film. He attacks a young couple but doesn't kill them, but shortly after ups the ante by murdering a couple in the woods. They call in help from one of the wild bunch, and the town is plunged into fear. And most of the film is actually based on the real life events, to the point that the film is often referred to as a semi-documentary, and the attacks seem to happen every 21 days. And are these women supposed to be students or teachers? They also dance to Auld Lang Syne, which is just kind of weird to hear outside of a New Year's Eve context, and like clockwork, the killer strikes using this very unusual trombone murder technique. They catch a man who claims to be the killer, but they suspect that that's not the case, and it moves into May of 46, and Marianne is here, so at least she got off that island, only to be shot in her own house, but she manages to escape. They track the killer's car and have a showdown with him, but he escapes into the swamp and was never heard from again. Some say he died in the swamp, and others say he was arrested for another crime and was in jail. But others say he just went back to his normal life and is still out there. Okay, now here's where things get strange, because in 2014, almost 40 years later, The Town That Dreaded Sundown was released, which began as a remake but became something else entirely. It opens with a recap of the real events and talks about the original movie in 1976, and mentions that every year the film is still shown in Texarkana, and we're told that the events we're about to see happened last year. So then it's 2013 and people are watching the original film at a drive-in. A couple leaves to make out, and a man wearing the Phantom Killer outfit attacks them and kills Corey, but leaves Jamie alive. Bill Lumberger's here, and Jamie's grandma is Lambert, and he next gets Castor and the Conjuring Girl. And Blair Witch Josh is here too, while the head vampire is a preacher. Oh, also Ed Lauter and Anthony Anderson are here as cops, and weirdly, even though this is supposed to be 2013, this news clipping was published in November of 2014. And Jamie gets an email from the Phantom saying they didn't catch him 66 years ago, although 66 years ago was 1947, not 1946. And there was a guy who they thought may have been the killer back when, because he was arrested and went to jail for 30 years, and the killing stopped immediately after he went away. The masked man continues his spree, including a recreation of the old trombone attack, And they find out that the son of Charles Pierce, director of the original film, lives nearby. And he tells them about a guy named Hank McCready, who was a victim of the original killer, but wasn't identified. And he says that his family was upset that no one remembered him. And he has a grandson that's still alive and may be the new Phantom. Jamie and her grandma decide to leave town, but the Phantom attacks, sending Jamie on the run. It's revealed that there's actually 2 bagheads, and Deputy Foster is one of them, but the other one is Corey from the beginning, who faked his death. It turns out that Foster is McCready's grandson, and he just shoots Corey, but she manages to get his gun away from him and kills him. But they never find his body, so I guess he could still be alive. So there you have it, 2 movies with a pretty interesting take on continuity. Like, they're sort of connected, but then again, they're not. And I liked these. The first one is pretty great, and the second one is decent, if not a bit cliche. Like I hate the ending, but they're both worth checking out. Our next entry is another horror jam called Fear Farm, and it's, yes, farm is spelled with a PH. I didn't end up making this an episode because it's a little obscure, and honestly, the films themselves, they're not that interesting. But do they have a continuity? Let's find out. We start in 2020 with Fear Farm, which kicks off with a naked woman in a cornfield being chased by a group of people who eventually kill her. It then jumps to 15 years later, and there's a bulletin board with a 2018 soccer schedule, so that may be our year, but it could also be old. And we have this group of teenagers who are perhaps a bit more annoying than usual. Like in the first 5 minutes, all they're really doing is bickering. Like, I think this guy whines, "Shut up, Melanie," about 4 times.
Shut up, Melanie, you don't know. Shut up, Melanie, you know I'm not scared.
And they start talking about a haunted corn maze and saying how about 15 years ago there was a bunch of killings, but of course they really want to go. And this girl mentions the Time's Up movement, which really took off in 2018 on the heels of the Harvey Weinstein horror stories, so again, we're possibly in 2018. There's then the group of people working at the haunted corn maze, and we're told they're a family, and they're like regular dude, bald overall guy, clown, barbed wire head, scarecrow dude, raver girl, and I guess other scarecrow dude. There's then the most unexplainable scene, like this guy walks into a porta-john. Then someone scares him from behind and says,
"Occupied, move occupied, dick fur."
Which seems to imply that he was in there when Brandon went in.
But like, where?
Like, you can see him walk in and see how small this thing is. There's nowhere for this guy to be hiding, and the door doesn't open, so it's not like he came in afterwards. So, what the hell? And then I love that they just shine a black light on their hand stamps, but then they put in this, like, computer noise, like it's scanning some kind of barcode or something. And they win a VIP experience from, Herschel Walker, and the challenge is to finish the maze in 2 hours, and they win $5,000, or under an hour, and they'll get 10. And I wonder if there's any werewolves in there, because I'm sure he'd rather be a werewolf than a vampire. And they shoot a bunch of zombies with paintballs. And this guy switches it up and says 10 years ago someone was sacrificed instead of 15, I guess. And they all decide to split up and take a different path, each in order to increase their chances. They wander around for a while, and I know that they're supposed to be in a separate corn maze, but the main one is like a huge attraction with a ton of people. But you can't hear any noises of people screaming off in the distance or anything. They soon find out that the scare actors are playing for keeps, and Brandon is captured, and Dustin's arm is chopped off, and he's run over. Melanie stabs one of the scarecrows, but eventually they catch them all, and their methods appear to be like skinning them for some reason. And they say that Melanie is the one that they're looking for, and kill Wendy. And what they're looking for is this special gene that makes people's skin able to be melted down into a miracle skin cream. So she kills herself. A missing poster for Brandon confirms that we're set in 2018, and confusingly, They say that the police aren't helping because he's over 18 and they have no way to prove he's not a runaway. But all four of them disappeared, like all after going to the corn maze. I find it a little hard to believe that the police would not get involved there. A mid-credit scene then reveals that Melanie, I guess, survived, and they have her captive, and I guess are skinning her. Yeah, yay. 1 year later, a sequel was released with Fear Farm 2, with the same team behind it. And we go back 15 years ago and see Herschel and his wife first coming up with the corn maze plan to get raw materials for their skin cream, and then goes to modern day, and he's still saying 15 years ago, implying that we're in the same year as the first one, so likely still 2018, and someone escapes their captivity, and they're still running around the maze. So this is either a year-round thing, or this is the following Halloween, so this may be 2019 now. And Melanie wakes up and tries to set free the other captives, and there's a bunch of them, and seriously, this many people went missing after all going to this one haunted corn maze, and no one figured this out? How dumb are the people of this town? The captives all have to get through the corn maze to escape, and the family are hunting them down, and the girls wander around arguing the entire time. I mean, it's like the Rob Zombie school of screenwriting. Like you have two people together, they have to hate each other, right? That's the only option. Right? They managed to kill off Big Scarecrow Guy, and I love that these girls have just been woken up from being in a medically induced coma for who knows how long, and in some cases probably months, and they're totally normal. Everything's fine, like no atrophy, no other medical concerns, nothing. They're just strolling around and snipping at each other, and then they get the Uncle Fester kind of guy killed. It comes down to Melanie versus Gemma, and they eventually recapture her, and Herschel just stabs her. It ends with them making a deal with Japanese investors to expand, so I guess expect a third. Can't wait.
So there you have two movies that I guess make sense together. Like they sort of feel like a direct continuation. Like they might as well have been filmed at the same time. But honestly, I didn't really care for these. They're not terrible. I just felt like I've seen this whole plot like 100 times already. So I guess I don't really recommend them. Just not my type of horror film. So this next one is one that I didn't use because A, I figured that not many people are aware of it in the first place, and B, it's comedy, and the comedy timeline videos just don't seem that popular. But I figure I can talk about them here, and it's the mini timeline of the They Call Me Bruce movies. Like if you had HBO when you were younger, you probably remember these. But do they have a timeline? This all started with
Oriental boy all along, running all the way to your home, breathing very hard like a kung fu dragon.
oh my god, like hearing that opening theme just completely shot me back in time. I can't believe how well I remember this.
Anyway, in 1982, They Call Me Bruce debuted, featuring stand-up comic Johnny Yoon. When a young boy's grandfather tells him to go to America to find a woman to take care of her, we cut away to a present-day Los Angeles, and oh my god, do I hate this stretch of highway, and if you've been to LA, you know why. We meet June, who everyone calls Bruce because they think he looks like Bruce Lee, and he's the chef for a mafioso who's being targeted by the FBI. He doesn't know martial arts, but he can fake it.
With my right foot, I can knock out that knife. With my left, I can kick your nose. With this hand, I can poke out your eyes. With this, I can break your neck. Take a good look at my face. I'm an Oriental.
And there's a poster up promoting a fight that takes place on May 2nd, 1981. So if this is upcoming and not an old poster, we're set in early 81. And Porky appears for a hot second, and Bruce goes to train at Cobra Kai. Well, I mean, at least the same dojo. A shot of a Playboy in a convenience store is from 1981, so that's looking pretty solid for our year. And there's just some street hoodlum wearing a swastika on his shirt, and they beat him up. Not for wearing a swastika though, but because he said his kung fu master was better than the others. So I don't know if this gang has their priorities straight. Margot Hemingway, sister of Mariel, appears as a villain here, and Bruce makes his moves.
I'm a sex object. Every time I ask girls sex, they object.
And he gets sent by his boss to New York to deliver special flour, which is obviously cocaine. They pass through Vegas and Texas, having silly adventures along the way, and headed to Chicago, where Coach Lubbock tries to kill him, and they finally reach the Big Apple, and it's revealed to Bruce that he's part of a drug-running operation, and he helps the FBI bring down the big boss. It ends with Bruce finding the woman his grandfather was talking about, and it's the Statue of Liberty. The film was actually a huge surprise hit, bringing in $16 million against a budget of less than $1 million, while only screening in about 300 theaters. So, a sequel was made, although it was 5 years later, with 1987's They Still Call Me Bruce. Johnny Yoon is back, now a co-director, and Bruce is now in Houston, and he runs into Joey Travolta. Like, yep, this is John's brother right here. He's looking for the soldier who saved his life in the Korean War, intending to give him a rare vase. Benson pops in, as does Marva Munson, and Bruce ends up taking a job at a martial arts studio, a job he's only given because he's Asian. One of his students is the kid from Space Raiders, and he has to get his vase back from a mob boss while a detective tries to solve the case as well. The kid ends up in a coma, and Bruce's prostitute girlfriend is kidnapped, and he's forced to participate in a fight that he has to throw in the 7th round, if he can make it that far, and his opponent is Ogre. Billy comes out of his coma to cheer him on, and Bruce just kinda magically knows martial arts now and wins the fight. The crime boss is arrested, and Bruce is reunited with Mr. Brown, who just so happens to be the detective the whole time. Everything wraps up happy, and there's no date, so we'll just roll with real time, and 5 years has passed between movies, and it's 87 year.
So there you have it, 2 movies, not much continuity, but I guess enough of one. They're not really connected. It's just the same character in a new adventure that has nothing to do with the first one, and these are all right. I think I enjoyed them more when I was younger, but they're still fairly fun but kind of forgettable. Okay, let's check out some sci-fi, I guess. This could just as easily been comedy, because we're going to check out the Flesh Gordon timeline. And here's a fun fact. Way back when I started the Patreon, I made a trailer for it. And I had thought about doing several exclusive mini timelines that would only be available there. And Flesh Gordon was one of them. I wrote the script, and then not long after, I restructured the Patreon, and I never did those minis. So here it is now, like 5 years later.
Things got fleshy back in 1974 with Flesh Gordon, which begins with a notice letting us know that the filmmakers are creating a new, silly folk hero to soothe the trying times, and make sure that it's unconnected to the character and creators of Flash Gordon. We're told that there's a new sex panic plaguing the planet, and people are just randomly having sex anywhere and everywhere. And there's a scientist named Dr. Gordon, and his son has helped track the source of the sex madness to space, and he's the oddly named Flesh Gordon.
Like, if you thought Flash was a weird name to give a kid, Flesh is probably a little weirder.
He's played by Jason Williams, and this was one of his earliest roles, but he went on to be in quite a few other things, including Society. He meets Dale, and their plane is hit by the dreaded sex ray, causing everyone on board to go at each other, including the pilots, but Flesh is able to keep it together enough to bail out, saving Dale. They meet up with Hans Zarkov, or, Dr. Flexi Jerkoff, and they plan to go to the source of the sex ray in this spaceship that kind of resembles, something. I can't quite put my finger on it. And they take off, and what do you call these pants that Flesh is wearing? Can you still buy those anywhere? They land on the planet Porno, facing off against the dreaded Penisaurus, and are captured by the evil Wang the perverted, I mean, yeah, I mean, you get it, right? Like everything is just going to be dicks. And Flesh is sent to fight in an arena. And here's the thing, originally this film, which is mostly softcore silliness, had scenes of hardcore stuff going on, but was cut due to issues with the authorities. And the X-rated footage was surrendered to the LA Vice Police and is now lost. You can still occasionally see some hardcore moments with the background characters though, and eventually they meet Chief Nelly, played by adult film star Candy Samples. He fights this awesome stop-motion cockroach thing, teaming up with Prince Precious, and they face down the rapist robots, and then Wang calls upon the great god Porno. And here's some silly facts. The FX in this movie were done by some legendary talents. Mike Miner, Greg Jane, Rick Baker, Jim Danforth, and Dave Allen were all involved. And the voice of the great god Porno was apparently done by Craig T. Nelson, his very first work, although he's uncredited. They knock down the beast, which crushes Wang, and with the day saved, they head back to Earth, and it promises a sequel called The Perils of Flesh. But that never came to be in that form. And now there's no date here, so we're going to go ahead with Real Time 74, I suppose. A sequel took 16 years until 1990's Flesh Gordon Meets the Cosmic Cheerleaders, which starts with a pretty kick-ass opening tune.
It's the same all over the world. The hero always gets the girl. The same all over the world. The hero always gets the hero always gets the girl.
And the originals directed Howard Zinn taking the chair again. Flesh is back, but clearly recast, and he's an actor on a film crew. But he's actually Flesh? Like making a movie about himself? And everyone drives classic old-timey cars, and Dale is here, but Flesh is kidnapped by the cosmic cheerleaders. So she goes to Dr. Jerkoff, and they fly off in space in search of the kidnappers. They're led by Robunda Hooters, played by Playboy playmate Morgan Fox, and it seems the men of her planet were all rendered impotent by a man in a black cloak. And there's of course lots of fart jokes. And I like how reviews of this one talk about how much more lowbrow the humor is in this one, because all I can think is like, did you see the first movie? Dale and Flexi make it to the alien planet, but the evil guy kidnaps Dale, and his voice sounds very familiar. So they head off in hot pursuit, but it's a trap. The evil presence is trying to lure Flesh in so he can steal his penis, and they blast the Earth with the impotence ray. And again, the people we see appear to be from the 1930s, and considering that the original serial was in 1936, it's possible that that's when this is supposed to be. They meet up with, poo people, and eventually Flesh decides to sacrifice his penis in order to save Dale. But they break out at the last minute, and it's revealed that the impotence ray is actually just a souped-up sex ray. And after fighting, it's revealed that the evil presence is indeed Wang, once again played by William Dennis Hunt, the only returning cast member, showing that this one is actually in continuity, although the first one really didn't seem like it was set in the 30s, although I guess it's not too far-fetched that it is. Wang gets grabbed by a Spider-Woman, and they're able to turn the impotence ray into a sex ray to bump up everyone's sex drive on Earth, but Wang survived. So we're going to go ahead and set this one in 1936 and put the original one a few years earlier. Let's say 1934. Why not? So there you have it. Two movies, sort of continuity. Like they're connected, but don't really seem to know what time frame that they're in. So I don't know if it really counts. And I love the first one. It's so silly, and the effects are so surprisingly well done that it takes you off guard. It's great, and I recommend that one. But the sequel, well, it's okay. But the humor's dumber, and is just not as charming overall. Like, mainly the actor that plays Flesh is just not that charming. Now let's jump to a superhero timeline, and this is another one that I did specifically for this video, and it's the Mask movies. I put this one off because, well, I kind of don't care for Jim Carrey. Like, at all. And for as much as I don't really like him, that goes about quadruple for Jamie Kennedy. So this is basically torture for me. But you know what? I love these comics. So let's check this out and see if it matches up to those in the slightest. This all begins back in 1994 with The Mask, although it technically started before that in the Dark Horse comic books of the same name, which were a pretty hyper-violent bunch of stories with a mild-mannered guy finding this mask and using it for revenge and mass murder. This is not that kind of story. Instead, we're set in Edge City, as a mask is uncovered from a chest down in the water, which then surfaces, and The Truman Show is on. And the late great comic Richard Jenny is here, as is Princess Fiona in her very first acting gig ever, which, never been in anything before? Sure, be the lead actress in this big budget superhero flick. Sure, okay.
Bright colors. It's a power tie.
Bright colors? Black and white are bright colors? So she works for Zed, who works with Dr. Storm from Fan 4 Stick, and after a rough night, Stanley ends up finding the mask. He has a little dog named Milo, and then he puts the mask on, which kicks off a cavalcade of mid-90s level CGI and changes him into this.
Smokehead!
He has seemingly magical abilities like pulling giant hammers from his pocket and making his eyes bug out and bounce around like he's basically a cartoon character, and is essentially just Jim Carrey doing the Jim Carrey thing, which I suppose you'll enjoy if that's your kind of thing.
A Tommy gun!
Just for comparison, this is how that scene plays out in the comic. Peter Riegert is here as Kellaway, another comic character, and if you haven't seen Riegert in the Hitman movie Cold Blooded, oh man, do I recommend that one. There's a reporter, and she's the replacement mermaid from Splash 2, and as the Mask, he robs a bank and goes to see Tina, and if you've ever heard Cameron Diaz sing, you know that this ain't her real voice here, and they have a dance number. And hold up!
And one of them was wearing a big green mask.
But then the next day...
Bye, Bank. I'll say.
If the footage is in black and white, then how did they know it was a green mask? Win Ben Stein's money is here, and he says the mask belonged to Loki, but no, this isn't the MCU. And then there's another big musical number. Just a bunch of those, I guess. And Stanley is double-crossed by Peggy, and Dorian gets it and transforms into a burlier mask and gets Stan locked up. Side note, at this point, Peggy just up and vanishes from the movie, and that's because originally Dorian killed her by throwing her into the printing press, but they wanted to bring her back for a sequel and also thought that the scene was too dark for the tone of the movie, so it was cut. Stanley escapes and Dorian attacks the club, and he kills mob boss Nico, but Tina convinces him to remove the mask, and Milo puts it on, but Stanley retrieves it and I guess just flushes Dorian down a drain. That was easy, maybe killing him. The day is saved and he tosses the mask away and stays with Tina. Now, there's no date in this one, so I guess Real Time 94 is fine. So they wanted to do a sequel right away, but Carrey said no, so it was put on a shelf until 2005, 11 years later, with Son of the Mask. Dr. Newman is back, and they talk about Loki again, and the mask is just like sitting there in a museum, and it turns out that the trickster is here, looking like some sort of nightcrawler, and can transform into a mask-looking guy, but the piece there is a fake. Turns out the real one is just floating in a creek, I'm gonna go with stream, outside the city, and Randy is here, because, you know, who better to replace Jim Carrey, right? They're pretty equivalent, right? Someone gets hit in the nuts, like, immediately, and there's a dog named Otis that looks like Milo, but it's a different dog. Odin is here, looking very Eddie Valiant, as is the Associate Director of the White House Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs. Really, look it up. But Stephen Wright is also here, playing Stephen Wright. But when Tim goes to a Halloween party, he puts on the mask, becoming this thing. He has an ID card that has a date with April '06 on it, and it's Halloween now. So that could mean April of 2006 is when the card was issued, and this is Halloween 2006. But I guess it could also be April 6th, but I don't think most people would write the day as '06. It's possible, but less common. So I think this is more likely 2006. They do another song and dance number, which is possibly the most cringe-inducing thing I have ever seen.
Ladies, let me hear you. You're just too good to be true. Yeah, good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. I love you, baby. The sight of you leaves me weak. They all know I love you. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. I love you. Hands in the air if it's fine.
And sort of reminded me what a weird time that the mid-2000s were for culture. Masked Tim goes home and bangs his wife, so we get animated CGI masked sperm, which is something I'm sure someone somewhere is really proud of coming up with. And he gets a raise and she gets pregnant. 9 months pass and the baby's born, so this would now be like the summer of '07, and hey, Jerry Minor. More time passes and Alvy gets bigger. He's like a couple of months old here, like he's sitting up on his own, and he has mask powers. And yeah, this says he was born on July 27th, so they had that right. But then we get an actual confirmation that Alvy was born on July 27th, 2003. So the Halloween was in '02. So I guess that date on that card was April 6th of '02 or whatever. But this is 2003, 9 years after the last film. Otis becomes masked dog, and we're then treated to a series of shenanigans with him, I guess, trying to kill the baby or something, intercut with Loki trying to find them. But he does, and confronts them, and then kidnaps Alvy, and weirdly has a twister board with a 2004 copyright. And you know, earlier on there was a 2004 award at the animation office. So I think that even though he was born in July of 2003, this is months later, possibly into 2004, which I guess you'd have to think, since Alvy is walking around, even though he has mask powers, he's probably more than 6 months old at this point, making it 2004. Tim puts the mask back on and they have a showdown, but the Big L runs out of time. But Tim makes amends between the father and son and gives them the mask. His cartoon gets on the air, and wow, Alvy looks exactly the same. So they went from pitch to on screen in record time. How quickly did they make that cartoon? And they're expecting another baby. The end. But of course, there was more than the movies. Like, besides a bunch of comics, there was an animated series that spun out of the first movie, but wasn't really in continuity with it. And a video game, and there's been discussion of bringing it back fairly frequently, although nothing has come of it. So there you have it, 2 movies, bare bones continuity. I suppose they're linked, but they don't have to be. And yeah, I hate these. Like, I'm a fan of either just like dumb lowbrow humor or subtle quiet humor. So this over the top, look how zany this stuff is, that kind of stuff just doesn't work for me. And I will say that Son of the Mask may possibly be one of the worst things that I've sat through in the history of this channel. Time for some action as we check out Accident Man. Although technically this could have gone in superhero timelines, I suppose, since it is based on a comic book. But I wrote this late last year when the second one came out. But I just realized that no one really knows it exists, so it didn't really figure it would be worth its own episode. But you're seeing it here, so let's see if it can have a timeline, even an accidental one. We start just a little while ago in 2018 with Accident Man, based on the British comic character of the same name. It has renowned stuntman Scott Adkins as Mike Fallon, a hitman who specializes in making his kills look like accidents. He hangs out in an industry bar called the Oasis with other killers like Carnage Cliff, who makes his kills look like a serial killer, Poison Pete, self-explanatory, Mick and Mac, who are Darth Maul and Black Dynamite, Jane the Ripper, who uses her femininity to trap her prey, Finicky Fred, who is known for inventing new ways for killing and picks test subjects at random from a phone book, and the bartender, Big Ray, played by one of the Punishers. They get their assignments from this guy who has been in like everything, but most importantly, one of those things was Howard the Duck. And Mike is attacked after a job, and then shortly after finds out that his ex-girlfriend has been murdered. He suspects a hit, and it matches the MO of Mick and Mac, and he confronts them and they confess but won't reveal who hired them to do it. There's a flashback to young Mike at 15 and everything looks like the 1970s, but he's got a fairly modern handycam that was available in, say, like the 90s or early 2000s. And Adkins himself was born in 76, so he'd be 15 in like 1991, which makes sense if the main film is in modern day. So it's funny how old school this all looks. But I'll admit that I'm not super up on the aesthetic of 90s England, where the flashback takes place. We see him being trained as a teen and then goes to see Charlie, the woman his ex left him for, but she's attacked by Cliff, so Mike has to kill him. He gets the information on the client from Milton, which upsets Big Ray, and he sets the crew after him. Mick and Mac confront him and he's able to take them both out after a big brawl and very easily kills Poison Pete. Fred shows up but doesn't really want to fight, so he knocks him out, and I guess this is a bit of an inside joke. He then confronts Mr. Zim, the oil tycoon who arranged Beth's death, and Mike has to fight Jane, stabbing her with her own sword, and then decaps Zim. Finally, he goes back to the Oasis and reveals that Milton double-crossed them and they kill him. Big Ray then kicks him out, and Mike declares the desire to turn over a new leaf and be a sort of protector for the city. And there's no date here, but a lot of close calls. And there's nothing to say that it's not real time, so we'll put it in 2018. 4 years later, in 2022, a sequel arrived with Accident Man 2, Hitman's Holiday, and Mike's back killing DJs. And okay, lots of info right away. This passport shows us that Mike was born on Valentine's Day in 1979. So those flashback scenes were in 1994. And the passport was issued in 2015 and expires in 2025. So we're in that time frame, which is a pretty big gap. But then there's these credit cards that all show a valid date as January of 2022 and expire in 24. So we're likely in real time, but we're definitely between those two dates. He went to Malta to get out of town after the last film, but doesn't quite say how long he's been there yet. He runs into Fred, who tells him that Ray lost the bar because no one would hire his firm anymore, and he and Fred go into business together. They get offered a job on a mob boss's kid, but turn it down, and then shortly after are kidnapped by that mob boss and charged with finding out who's after her son, or else they'll kill Fred. Big Ray shows up, and he's the one who was the one who put the hit out, and he's bringing down a squad to go after Dante. Mike has to go up against some killers while protecting a complete idiot.
Anybody ever tell you that, yeah? You look like a melted Ben Affleck.
Well, he's an idiot, but he's also right. Mike goes through, one by one, various bizarre personalities trying to kill Dante, including a killer clown. It eventually comes down to Mike versus Big Ray facing off over Dante, but their bond wins out and Fred is let go. However, Ray planted a bomb on Dante, killing him and his mother, and they collect the money from the job and go into business together. So there you have that. Two movies that work well enough together, like they're vaguely linked. There's nothing really that contradicts anything. So it's another one that can be connected if you want. But you can also just watch one and not need the other to get what's going on. I mean, it helps with the bar and like some of the characters, but whatever. And I like these fine. They're entertaining enough. Like they don't rewrite the books on action, but they were fun. Okay, back to horror here, and this is one that I didn't end up doing because I figured it was just too obscure to cover, really, and the movies are a bit repetitive, and it's the Hotel Inferno movies. And I started this script a few years ago, back when there was only 2 of them, but I never finished. But now that there's a 3rd one, I guess we'll check it out. So we first check in back in 2013 with Hotel Inferno from Necrostorm, and it's billed as the first POV-style horror film. According to this cell phone, it's Saturday, December 7th, and that's how the date lined up in 2013. So it looks like we're set in real time. We're looking through the eyes of Frank, apparently a hitman on a job, and he wears these like Google glasses, and he's hired to kill 2 people. They're murderers, and his bosses provide him with some unique weapons to use, and he kills the female in super gory fashion, and then he shoots the male in the bathtub. It's revealed that he killed other employees of the agency, and he now has to escape the hotel and other killers that are in there. Frank then basically navigates through the hallways, encountering various killers, having some fights, and killing them in over-the-top, extremely gory fashion using quick editing and some digital techniques, and half of them work really, really well, and the other half not so much. The whole film appears to have been shot silently, and the sound work is one of the biggest flaws. It soon becomes apparent things are not what they seem, with weird symbols on the door, and he starts to realize that the people he's fighting are already dead. Eventually, he manages to get out of the hotel, but he's still stalked by several hitmen, and Frank's eventually captured. He kind of very easily escapes, and there's some sort of creature with a flamethrower mouth, and he fights for a little more, and is captured again. But another demon attacks and kills his torturer, and then I guess him. 4 years later, a sequel arrived with 2017's Hotel Inferno 2, The Cathedral of Pain, which picks up right where the last one left off. So we're still in 2013, presumably, and I guess Frank survived, and he makes his way to some massive cathedral where this monster thing attacks him, and he's captured again. There's some torturers here, and he's told that he's in hell, and this witch tells him that he can still regain his body, and that the cult above are feeding the demons through the use of the hotel. Frank can return to life if he's able to collect 5 pieces of a human soul. So now he's navigating around the chambers of hell, and instead of fighting against hitman-looking guys, he's going against an assortment of creatures. And he just walks around, and honestly, it's sort of the equivalent of just watching someone walk through a really bloody haunted house, or possibly like Guar's storage unit. He gets some sort of gun that kills the demons, and he's told that if you die in hell, your soul returns to Earth, but without the pieces of the human soul, you may become an animal, or even an inanimate object. Also, actions taken in hell have consequences on Earth, and the longer that he stays there, the more corrupted he becomes, and eventually he faces off against these things that look like D&D mimics, losing a hand in the process. He finds one part of his soul and fights a giant flame-throwing monster and tries to rescue the witch, and it ends on a to be continued. It took 4 years for them to follow up with it, but they did in 2021 with Hotel Inferno 3, The Castle of Screams, and it picks up immediately after, so we're still in 2013, and the witch is here again, although with a different voice, and the next place that he has to go through is an old castle, with a new assortment of beasts like the Ice Keeper, and this big goofy thing here. And he makes this thing called a headhunter, which allows him to see, and it's revealed that his gun is magical, and he has to earn the bullets. If he kills a demon, he gets a single bullet, but he also gets bullets if he himself gets hurt. He also gets a new organic gun that would make David Cronenberg happy, and he replaces his missing hand with the witch's. Then, it's kind of just the same thing again as he navigates through the halls of the castle, now fighting chicken monsters straight out of Lloyd Kaufman's dreams, and gets a new shotgun, and fights more until the Ice Keeper awakens, and the witch and Frank merge together, and it's once again to be continued. I guess if we're doing this every 4 years thing, apparently we'll look forward to that in 2025. Can't wait.
So there's that, and yeah, they have a pretty solid continuity. It's all one story. Like if you watch them all together, it's just one continual story. But honestly, it just feels like watching someone else play a video game for several hours. The point of these movies are really the gore effects, so if that's your main interest, and you're not that interested in story or whatever, you might want to skip them. After that, I feel like we needed something a little bit more lighthearted, so we're going to the comedy realm again to check out the Screwballs franchise. This trilogy is a classic 80s sex comedy that used to run on HBO late at night, and like a bunch of the comedy timeline scripts I wrote, I just sort of set it aside for a future date, but since I really only do comedy ones like twice a year, it kept getting pushed back, but here it finally is.
Well, we're starting in 1983 with Screwballs, and it's pretty clear we're set in the past based on the cars and the clothing, and it's at Taft Adams High School. And yes, These kids are clearly high school age. There's a dick principal, and of course the school playboy Rick, who sees that they're doing freshman breast exams, so he poses as a doctor in order to grope them. So let's break this down. This is a high school, and this exam is for freshmen. He's a senior, which I guess is why they don't recognize him, but first up, he's basically just sexually assaulting them. But more importantly, they're freshmen. They're like 15 years old, like 16 tops. So yeah, already the humor is off the charts. He ends up getting detention, as does Rich Brent for simulating oral sex in French class, and as does Jim for going into the girls' locker room, although he is deceived to go there. But then so does Melvin, whose last name is Jerkovsky, for pleasuring himself in the meat locker. And so is Bowie for setting up a bunch of mirrors to look up girls' dresses. They all realize that one girl was mostly involved in all of their troubles, so they make a bet to see who can have sex with her first. And Jim tries first, but her parents are there.
I'll bark like a dog for you. Ruff! Ruff!
Does she know what a dog is? There's also Bootsy here, played by Linda Shane, and she co-wrote the script, so I guess blame her for half of these shenanigans, and she also posed for the cover art. Bowie's attempt also fails, and they go see The Wild Women of Wongo from 1958, so this is set after that. And then, for some reason, they just kind of cut in the theme song to Battle Beyond the Stars in there. The next devious plan is to bury Marvin in the sand with binoculars so he can spy on Purity's boobs at the beach, and Brent is seduced by his teacher. But remember, forget the fact that the actor is like 30, he's supposed to be a high school student, so the chance of him being underage is pretty high. There's later a poster up on the wall for the old Charles Bronson flick Machine Gun Kelly, which also came out in '58. And have I mentioned that Brett constantly has a tennis racket in his hands? Like, every time you see him. In the end, they finally managed to have a big gust of wind blow Purity's clothes off, exposing her breasts. That was the point of the whole movie. There's no clear date in it, but it's supposed to be mid-60s, so I guess, let's just say 1965. 2 years later, the boys were back with Screwballs 2, which was also called Loose Screws. And we're no longer at Taft Adams, and now at Beaver High? And then it looks like the crew is back, but their names have changed, and some actors have as well. Rick is gone, and a new guy is now Brad. Brent is now Steve, also a different actor. Howie is now, Hugh G. Rection, and Marvin is now Marvin Eatmore, not Jerkovsky, but they're the same actors. So I think they're supposed to be the same guys, but also not? It said that this is their 4th time as seniors, so they're sent to a special summer program. But then, all the cars are modern, so it's no longer the 60s, which pretty much says once and for all that this isn't really a sequel and these are different kids. Once again, it starts with pretending to be doctors to get the girls to strip and grope them, but things get out of hand and they end up at the principal's office.
So Bradley, where's all these luscious babes you promised us?
You were just in a room with a bunch of them. Like 10 minutes ago, dude. They set up a point system for hooking up, of course, because 80s, and then Brad dresses up as a girl to get into the dorms. And you know, this is now the 3rd time in the movies that he's done this. Like, it's okay, man. Like, you don't have to pretend you're doing it to meet girls. Just admit that you like wearing women's clothing. And then there's this magic song.
I've got a rubber in my wallet. One of those little whatchamacallits. I'm saving it for that special day when the right girl comes my way.
And Hugh has a pretty rad Megatron watch. And then, after a series of shenanigans, several of which border on assault, they get expelled. So they break into the big high school ceremony, screen a film of the principal having sex with the French teacher, and then pump in an aphrodisiac to make the teachers all strip and do it. But then the boys just appear and play a musical number.
Do it. 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 Do it.
Even though there hasn't been any mention of the film before this that they were musicians. It's like, seriously, the whole band thing just appears out of nowhere. And based on their handling of the instruments, none of the actors had any idea what to do. So it doesn't even really amount to anything. There's no reason for it at all. Anyway, there's no date, so it's real time 85. The trilogy was completed 3 years later with Screwball Hotel from the same director as the first two, and there's a big hotel that seems to be having a staffing issue, and it's also bankrupt and has 5 weeks to pay up or else Dick Business takes it over. But there's a big Miss Purity pageant coming up, and there's now 3 dudes at a military school, but they're all new characters. None of the names or actors are the same, and they get into a bunch of troubles, so they're expelled. So they go to the hotel for a job, although it's one that doesn't really pay. They immediately get into shenanigans and into trouble with their bosses, but it turns out that one of them is involved in the drug trade with these 2 dealers with Uzis, who are very clearly white guys, but speak in thick Speedy Gonzales accents, but are also wearing Japanese-themed accessories. And look, this is clearly a sort of different continuity with different characters, but it's pretty easy to just lump it in with the last one. It's basically the Rick/Brad character, Howie/Hugh, and Marvin, just with different names. With time running out, they open an illegal casino in the hotel, raising a bunch of money really fast, and trick the Purity Ball girls by posing as Moses, I guess, and get them into a big oil wrestling match to raise more money. But they get caught. When they decide to hijack the camera feed for the pageant, they say that it's 1988, so this one has an actual date. And they spike the girls with aphrodisiacs so they get up there and just start getting wild. And when they crown the champ, they say that she's Miss 1988. But then, when she starts stripping down, an old lady starts just shooting at the crowd with a submachine gun. So is this 1988 or right now? The boys pay up with money that they used from selling video of the pageant, and they win the day, finding the women of their choice.
So there you have it, a real continuity mess. I suppose some things line up, but not really. You can just watch one of these or whatever. They don't need to be in order or anything. And they're fine, pretty lightweight in terms of comedy, and they have some fun moments, but overall they didn't really hold up. You know, there was a point in time that a bunch of the straight-to-video horror stuff was just bugs. Lots of bugs. So of course, there had to be a Spiders. And of course, that would turn into a franchise. And this is one that I did a while back, but never used because I figured people were only kinda into it. And since it's more of an anthology sort of series, it's a bit meh with timeline stuff. But let's go get stuck in its web for a while.
Things got leggy back in 2000 with Spiders from Gary Jones, who also made the really fun Mosquito. There's a shuttle launch that's doing experiments, and there's a big spider on board, and the evil queen is here, and she's a reporter for a tabloid trying to work on a story about aliens. Meanwhile, in space, their test spider gets loose after a random solar flare, and it crashes in the desert right where Marcy and her co-workers are. The spider, nicknamed Mother-in-Law, survives the landing and lays eggs in one of the astronauts right before getting stepped on. The crew manage to sneak into the government facility that they take the astronaut to, and they're just in time to see a massive spider erupt from his mouth and start to web people up. They find out that there were Apollo missions that were off the books.
It's like a bad sci-fi movie.
Yep, that's exactly what this is like.
Before long, Spidey molts, and it turns out that the people at the beginning saying that they were aliens may have actually been telling the truth. This guy hacks a computer, so of course he has to say it.
That's it, I'm in.
Mother-in-law has been injected with alien DNA, which I guess they had to do in zero gravity because, reasons. But Jake has been bitten, and when we next see her, Mother has gotten quite a bit bigger and kills Slick. And then just starts laying waste to everyone in the lab, popping out of corridors like a xenomorph, eventually taking out the head of the lab, until they are able to smash it with an elevator. Marcy and tough guy John escape, and it seems like all is well, but there's 20 minutes left of the movie, so something's up. And yup, Agent Gray is still alive, but has a spider egg in him, and it just erupts into another one. Like, how does this even happen? Logistically, where did it fit? Instantly, it's the size of a house, and it heads towards the city. Our heroes chase it in a helicopter, ending up at the LA Convention Center, and they shoot it with a rocket launcher, but its skin is too strong. But they're able to get close enough to shoot a rocket down its throat, killing it. So there's no clear date here. Let's go with real-time 2000. 1 year later, a sequel hatched with Spiders 2, Breeding Ground, with Sam Furstenberg taking over as director, who also did the second two Enter the Ninja movies, and also a couple of the American Ninjas. It starts with a small cabin cruiser being boarded, and some people are kidnapped while the rest are killed, and Jason and Alexandra here find the wreck, but are soon stuck in a big storm. They get picked up by a cargo ship run by the Scanner Cop, and Bull is here, and things on the boat are tense. Jason is soon finding storage rooms full of dead bodies on board, and it appears as if that spider is here too. Turns out that the doc is running experiments that involve human test subjects and spiders, and they use Jason as the big Iraq is on board here and plant an egg in him. And pretty soon, all of the test subjects hatch, and a whole bunch of spiders erupt from their bodies. They start killing off the crew, taking out the captain, and they fight them off with a handy flamethrower that I guess is like standard issue on ships. There's a whole bunch of spiders, though, and one of the bigger ones takes out Dr. Gerbach, and Alex goes on the hunt for the antidote, stalking around corridors and facing down spiders like a super discount Ripley, and she manages to get it and give it to her husband, hopping on an escape boat. They blow the ship up, sinking all the spiders, and are rescued by a passing helicopter. There's one spider left, though, which they blow up with a grenade in one of the worst explosion effects that I've seen in a while. Now, there's no date here, so we'll say 2001, 1 year later, but I guess it's debatable that it's even connected. Like the way the spiders operate is similar, but there's no mention of the alien DNA here, and these appear to be solely the work of Dr. Gerbach. So then, 12 years later, for some reason that I cannot fathom, someone was like, hey, remember that pretty obscure set of movies a decade ago? Let's make a third part. And they did, with 2013's Spiders 3D. Like the first one, it starts with a science experiment with spiders in space, and then we're in New York, and ew, Xander is here. Don't tell Johnny Rico. And a piece of satellite comes crashing down and into the subway. There's spiders loose attacking rats and some very questionable CGI, and Rachel here is on the case, and her daughter is a very young Sydney Sweeney. And her and Jason are getting divorced. Like Jason and Rachel, not Jason and the daughter. She's way too young. And there's a whole horde of a tarantula-sized critters here. And yeah, how is it that the CGI looks worse here, 12 years later? Like the earlier films, the spiders lay their eggs inside their victims, but they're looking for a queen egg, and it's missing. This guy says he's been working on the project for 20 years, which might indicate that this is not related to the first two and that this is a new origin story for the spiders. And we get Rachel's resume, which tells us that we're at least past 2010. And a little later, we get a good look at their badges, which also says 2010. So I think it's possible that that's our year here. The spiders start to grow, mutating into these monstrous-looking things. And this guy says 20 years ago they found a spaceship under the ice. And there was an alien inside, and they took that DNA and spliced it with the spiders in space, which is pretty similar to the story of the first film. So it's possible that it's a continuation, but the details are slightly different, so it's also possible that it's a straight reboot. As a side note, this subway area that they keep showing us is just a set. It's a fake subway specifically for filming, and you can tell this because of the stock fake posters they have up, like this fake movie poster, and my favorite, the bottled water brand simply called Water,
which is miles from other waters.
There's tons of them down in the subway, all different sizes, and they get up to the streets. And again, this whole street area is just a set, so all the signs are stock images. And it's why so much of the film takes place on this little stretch of street. Turns out that there's a massive one that breaks through the street, and they lead it down into the subway for a final face-off where Jason rams it with a subway car, saving the day and then walking down into a very large matte painting. But there's one spider left.
So there you have it, 3 movies, no continuity really. In fact, they basically contradict each other, so it's pointless for them to be a series even. And these are mostly mildly entertaining. Like the first is the most enjoyable, but they're all decent time killers, even though at this point they basically just feel like standard sci-fi movies, but I certainly wasn't mad at them. Here's another short bit of horror, and it's the mini timeline of the Ancient Evil movies. This is one that I did originally for the mini timeline month just this past February, but I just felt like there was things that deserved the spots more, so I pushed this one back and it fell off the schedule. So I guess it's getting unwrapped here.
We'll unwrap this starting back in the year 2000 with Ancient Evil Scream of the Mummy, directed by David Ducati, and there's a mummy found in an Aztec temple. And it's at a small university for study. Jerky student Morris here checks it out because it's an ancient relic that I guess they just keep out in the open with no safeguards or anything, and steals a bracelet from its wrist and gives it to a girl. That night, nerdy Norman witnesses the mummy coming back to life, and I mean, possibly is the one that brought it back to life, and he reveals that he's a high priest descendant, the last of his line, waiting for the mummy to be brought there so that he can control it, and uses it to kill his professor. And oh, to go to film, of course, a guy is wearing tighty whities, and they decide to put the bracelet back and then just end up sneaking around campus in the dark while the mummy lurks. He starts picking up the students, starting with Morris, and the bodies start stacking up, and Norman reveals himself as the villain. And he needs Stacy because she's a virgin. As he conducts the ritual, Dawn faces the wrapped one, but he figures out that it's the amulet that controls it and destroys it, so it kills Norman. But he's then able to get it to stab itself with its own knife, killing it. Now, there's no date visible, so we're going to go with Real Time 2000. A sequel appeared 5 years later with Ancient Evil 2, Guardian of the Underworld, although Dakota wasn't involved, and this one starts some time ago with one of the slowest sword fights caught on film. But then we're in present day, and in Martha's Vineyard, and you know how I know that I'm going to have a bad time watching them film? Well, it's when I go to IMDb and none of the actors have pictures.
Not a good sign.
These two are planning on resurrecting Anubis, but they say that if he takes a physical form, he'll be corrupted and bring death around the world.
Okay, yeah, sure, whatever.
Ancilla here calls up her dead mother, who was a witch also, and she realizes that to call Anubis, she needs to offer up some souls, and invites a bunch of people to get together. And they go to a cemetery and tell a story of a mother from 13 years ago who killed her child, and then conducts her ritual. And after a false start, it works, and this thing emerges, which I guess is Anubis. And it kills Ancilla, and then starts chasing the others. They wander around the woods for a while, occasionally encountering some locals and killing them, so Paul and Jen try to stop it by finding Ancilla's spellbook in order to send it back where it came from. And I think it should be obvious from this point, because there's only 15 minutes left of this sucker, but this has no connection to the first one. It is a sequel in name only and isn't really linked. They end up facing off against the noob, and the spellbook from the book kicks in, zapping him away. And yeah, again, no visible date, so we're going to go with Real Time 2005.
So there you have it, 2 movies, no continuity, no nothing. These do not connect at all, and to be honest, I'm not even sure why they even used the name. It's not like it helped to sell copies, considering I don't think that many people were aware of the first Ancient Evil. And these are both kind of dull. I mean, neither one is like too dreadful,
but they are both a bit on the boring side. So let's head back into Silly Land with another 80s teen sex comedy, although this one has a bunch of non-teens as well, and it's Hard Bodies. Again, I wrote this and just held off because I didn't really have any rush to put out comedy content, so this is pretty much its only shot, although I have to tell you to brace yourself because from a continuity standpoint, these are really weird and surprising. This starts back in 1984 with Hard Bodies, and we're introduced to Scotty, played by Mike Tobacco, and he's seeing Christy here, and him and Malachi hang out at the beach, and they're bothered by a group of geeks, including one who should cover that face up or something, like maybe with a hockey mask. These three older guys are there at the beach who want to have a fun summer and party like teenagers, but everywhere they go, they get shot down. Like maybe because they're hating on women that are like half their age. Maybe, try your own age, dudes. So they enlist Scotty to help them by teaching him the ways to scam women into having sex with him. And he agrees, paving the way for about 100 self-made ladies' men online with their pickup tips. Meanwhile, Scotty is kicked out of his apartment because he can't pay the rent, so he agrees to do it, and he begins his lessons, coming across the Bride of the Reanimator. And their plan is to invite a bunch of women to their big party on the beach, and it starts to work as they get some numbers. At the party, they each seem to be doing all right, and two of the three pick up women, and the band Vixen plays. And then this guy talks about the women working out and says that they're the bodies for the 80s, so it's definitely in the 80s. There's a poster on the wall for a concert on Friday, August 19th, which is how that fell in 1983, so that might be our year, but that poster may just be old. And they continue their scheming, but Hunter crosses the line into straight assault, so Scotty intercedes because he's okay with manipulation, but not force, I suppose. So Hunter sabotages him and Christy. The geeks come back, but they have some good taste in music.
Balls off the stage. Yeah, get off, Spitballs. Yeah, what are you doing? Stop shit. Jerk off.
And Scotty has to intervene with Christy and Hunter because he realizes that he loves her and wants to leave his Playboy days behind. Ashby gets mad that Hunter is betraying what they came there for and helps Scotty to sabotage his big party. The geeks come in and cause havoc. They feather Hunter and embarrass Rounder, and the next morning, Rag finds love. Scotty and Christy get back together, and without any other confirmation, we'll go with that 1983 date. 2 years later, a sequel arrived with the same team called Hard Bodies 2. And Frank is here directing a movie in Greece, and their actors missed their plane, and Scotty and Rag are here, looking drastically different as they've both been recast. And Scotty is that actor, and his fiancee's name is Morgan, who's not Christy.
Look, I think you're confusing me with the character I play in the film. I'm not a dumb surfer kid who walked off the beach with a surfboard and a heart-on.
So I think they may be saying that the first movie was just a movie, and Scotty was playing himself in that one, and this is real life. Or did he become an actor after that, and they based the previous movie and this one on his real life? Rag's passport, which is apparently an actual passport of a guy named Richard Allen Hench, and this sent me down a rabbit hole. Hench worked on this film as the second assistant director and did behind-the-scenes work on several other films, but also appeared in front of the camera in a number of things, but in recent years had switched to construction, working on Happy Death Day, and passed away just last year in 2022. Anyway, this is his passport, and Rag's name is shoddily just pasted on it, and his picture just plopped on there. But the document was issued in February of 1986, so we're at least past that. And again, all this stuff is for the movie, not real life. Ashby is here too, played by the same actor, and Lana is here again too. She was the real estate agent in the last one, but here she's married to the director. Movie Scotty sneaks aboard a semester at sea cruise where I guess all the students just suntan topless, and Ashby and Lana are characters in the movie. So to get this straight, because this is so needlessly confusing, Lana is a character played by an actress named Lana, who is the director's wife and was the actress in the first movie. This is weirdly and unnecessarily meta. I'll reiterate, the first movie was just a movie. This is about them making a follow-up to that movie. But the characters of the movie share the same names as the actors playing them and act in fairly similar ways. But they're also different? Did you really expect to be this confused by Hard Bodies 2? Scotty encounters a lot of vagina, and we get the dual storylines of the film within the film, with movie Scotty trying to woo the daughter of a mob boss, and real Scotty falling for his co-star as his relationship with Morgan falls apart. Then, due to a miscommunication with a local actor, instead of pretending to kidnap Scotty, this guy really does it. He's set free when the guy's wife recognizes him and Morgan cheats on him, so he breaks it off with her and everyone pairs up. And they finish the shoot with reality and fantasy overlapping. So there you have whatever that was. I'm not sure if anything on this list will be as weird as that one was in terms of continuity. Like, what the hell was even that? And these may not be great, but they were pretty fun. And I'll tell you, trying to piece together what they were going for with that reality and how it works in the second film made it worthwhile. Here's another one from a long time ago that I did, and I just figured that there wouldn't be that much interest in, and it's the mini timeline of the Devil in the Flesh movies. This is only 2 entries, but Rose McGowan is in one of them, so I was down for it. So back in 1998, Devil in the Flesh was released, directed by a guy mostly known for doing like 20 Billy Joel music videos. It begins with Amy Blue, and she survives a massive house fire, but her mother and mother's boyfriend die. She's sent to live with her eccentric grandma and immediately starts showing some crazy tendencies, and starts at a new school where she makes a new friend and forms a crush on her teacher. And then there's this really weird scene.
So, where to next?
Let's see, we could,
Oh, wait a second.
Okay.
Shopping makes me thirsty.
I do not understand the point of that. Where did she go? To get a drink? Like they don't show it or anything, so she just goes off screen for a moment for no reason. She has nightmares about burnt corpses, and Granny's kinda psycho. And then she makes friends with Janie, who was the replacement Jamie Lloyd. And for some reason, everyone here refers to her as a freak, when even by like 90s scene girl standards, she's barely even oddly dressed, and is clearly an extremely attractive girl that wouldn't be an outcast at any school, really. Debbie starts getting more aggressive, injuring her rival for Mr. Rinaldi's attention, all while the police try to figure out what happened with that fire. We find out that she had a crush on a teacher at her last school, and he ended up dating her mom, and when she crosses the line, Debbie kills her grandma. Afterwards, she just goes full on and tries to seduce Rinaldi and then kills some dude trying to rape her, and her obsession escalates into a confrontation where Peter firmly rebukes her, and the police get involved, so Debbie blows her own head off with a shotgun. Now, there's a license plate here on a cop car that has a registration sticker that expires in January, and the sticker color is for 1998. But if it expires in January of 98, then this is most likely 97 then, for this to still be valid. It turns out that she faked her own death by killing Janie instead and goes after Peter's girlfriend, but he gets there in time, and they fight, but he's able to knock her out. She's still alive though, and gets arrested. That one did well enough, I guess, for them to make a sequel 2 years later with 2000's Devil in the Flesh 2. And Debbie is in an institution, but I guess has a crush on her doctor? And weirdly, it's the same actor that played Peter, but he's a doctor now and has a different name, so I assume he's a different character. But Rose McGowan didn't come back for this one, so Jodie Lynn O'Keefe took over the role. And she escapes, catching a ride with a young girl, but newspaper says that she's Debbie Strong. But in the last one, she was Debbie Strand. So perhaps this is meant to be a different character? So possibly the dumbest character that I've seen in a while pepper sprays herself and then backs into a pole to kill herself. And her license was issued in '98 and expires in '02. So we're sometime in between there. Debbie heads to a new school posing as the dead girl, and she immediately forms a bond with one of the professors there. Taking on the name of Tracy, she butts heads with her RA, and her roommate makes a suggestion.
I mean, the whole world of knowledge is right here at our fingertips.
Porn.
Porn?
Yeah, the raunchier the better. Oh, come on. Tell me you've never seen porn before.
Well, there is this one site.
Is it Tub Girl? Do not Google that. She starts killing again and her obsession deepens and she ends up getting him in bed, but he immediately regrets it. Her RA tries to blackmail her, so she kills her and her roommate suspects.
I went to the bank, to the ATM machine.
You went to the automated teller machine? Once again, she is spurned because her teacher wants to remain with his current girlfriend, and they have a confrontation in which she's stabbed, but manages to survive and goes on the run, ending up in a car with a license plate that expires in August of 2000. And since she was starting a new school year in the beginning, I suppose maybe that this is the fall of 1999 then. So there you have it, 2 movies, maybe continuity, not really. It's hard to say. I'll just point out that the second one, even though it purports to be connected to the first one, sort of isn't, and you do not have to have seen it to know what the storyline is. And these are decent. I liked the first one, even if I've seen that storyline play out 100 times in Lifetime movies, but it was fine. The second one, you could pass. Here comes some action since we're jumping into the Barbarian Queen. Now, this is one that I did last year when I was doing the sword and sorcery stuff, and I ended up moving it because of some reason or another that, I'll be honest, I do not remember, and it went on the shelf. So now I'm bringing it out. This begins in 1985 with Barbarian Queen, which kicks off letting us know exactly what kind of movie it is with a pre-credits rape scene. Always a classy way to start your film. And it's the wedding day of Queen Amathea, and her little sister Taramis is the girl from the intro, and the village is attacked. Typical sword and sorcery opening. Women in peril and a small village destroyed by a group of raiders. Eventually, everyone is either dead or captured, except for Amathea, played by Lana Clarkson, and her handmaid, Estril, played by Kat Shea. Now, Kat would pretty soon leave the acting world and get into directing, doing the Strip to Kill movies, and then moving on to bigger things like the infamous Poison Ivy with Drew Barrymore, Carrie 2, and recently handled a new Nancy Drew film. Along with Tiniara, the women decide to seek revenge and come across a group of Lord Eriker's men along the way, killing them all and finding Tamaris, and manages to find a way into the villain's city, where she finds out that her fiancé is alive and nuzzles a wall to celebrate. There, Estril is also attacked and assaulted, and that's a predominant theme here. This is a half hour into the film, and so far there's been 4 rape scenes. The girls are then captured, and 5 rape scenes, I guess. And Tianara tries to escape and is killed, and Amathea is tortured while naked, of course, and Argon tries to organize the captives while being forced to fight in an arena. And then, 6. The queen escapes, and they eventually rally the local rebels, and just when it seems that all is lost, they put their plan in motion with the rebels attacking, the gladiators rising up, and Amathea leading them, eventually fighting one-on-one with Eriker, but the killing blow comes from Taramis. They win the day, and Amathea and Argon are reunited, and obviously, this is a fantasy world, unlike our own, but let's assume that it's on a parallel timeline, and this is this world's version of 1985. 5 years later, in 1990, a sequel appeared, with Barbarian Queen 2, The Empress Strikes Back. Lana is back, but is now a princess, and her name is Athalia, and her father, the king, has been killed. So she has a different name, no husband, and is now just the princess instead of a queen. So I would wager that this is just a different character instead of this being a sequel. With her father dead, her power is challenged by the evil Ancaris, who wants to get his hands on their sacred scepter, so she escapes into the woods, where she teams up with warrior woman Zarla and a group of Amazonian warriors. They taunt her for being too high maintenance and not a fighter, again, a sharp contrast from her character in the first one, again pointing to a new character. And you know that this is a different kind of movie because it takes a full 17 minutes before someone is sexually attacked. The princess may not be that great of a speaker.
We had a king who ruled us wisely once, who let even the poorest know that justice was on their side.
Oh yeah, you know, I'm sure the rebels of the forest love being called the poors. But it turns out that they do like it and rally behind her, and she fools around with one of the king's men that seems conflicted about their evil ways. And there's also this young girl named Tamis that I think is supposed to be the Empress of the title. And let's talk about that for a second, because this is called The Empress Strikes Back, but there's no Empress in the other movie, and it's not like we see anyone attack one at any point for one to strike back. And there's not even any Empress in this movie. Like, there's a princess, and this little girl is also a princess, but no one is an Empress. And look at this cover. I think this is the Empress, but this character is nowhere to be seen. For that matter, neither are either of these two women. Athalia is eventually captured, where she is once again strapped naked to a rack, and the rebels and Arion eventually have to intervene and save her. Tamis does some black magic and transforms, but still looks nothing like that cover girl, leading to a big battle at the castle as the rebels rise up, and Tamis gets stabbed because her dad no longer recognizes her. Athalia kills Hofrax, and Ancaris is also dead, presumably killing himself in grief, and she claims the scepter, becoming the new ruler. So, here's what I'm proposing. This is a prequel. Upon becoming queen here, she goes on to rule, but never marries Arion, and takes on a new name to denote her newfound commitment to the poors. And a few years later, the events of the first movie happen, with her now more battle-skilled and mature. So let's say that this is in parallel 1980, with 5 years in between films, which is what it actually was, but just in the opposite direction. Now, here's where this gets weird, because in 1985, the same year as the first Barbarian Queen, there was also this movie called Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. It was from the same director as BQ. The opening of the film is basically a sort of greatest hits of sword and sorcery flicks, showing a bunch of footage from Deathstalker and Sorceress, but then it just gets really weird because there's young Simon here, who can make statues come to life and has a pet Yeti, and the peaceful King Tylor is deposed by an uprising from the evil Shurka, who classic sci-fi fans may remember as Buck Rogers' Hawk. Simon is rescued, but is attacked again in the forest, only to be rescued again by the sequel Buford Pusser. And I should say right now that this is absolutely not connected in any way to Barbarian Queen. But I'm including it here because A, I want to, and B, I need to talk about its sequel, and C...
You have not found that ring yet!
Well, we're still looking, Master.
I rest my case. Meanwhile, if you watch the movie Sorceress and were like, hey, that lion dragon thing at the ending of that one was awesome, well, they thought so too, because they just straight up lifted that segment and nonsensically added here. Oh, but there's also a spider creature, and then zombie warriors, lizard men, hobgoblin guy who looks like he's gonna sell me cookies, and this giant lizard thing. But then also ghosts, bats and dinosaurs, this monkey monster. It's like jam-packed. But you know what it doesn't have? One of the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal, even though they put one on the freaking movie poster. Oh, but there's a Cyclops and a female Cyclops, Rainbow Bridges, and they eventually free all the captives in the castle, and they rise up with Simon and Shirka facing off with some very 80s effects going on, and our heroes are triumphant. Again, no date here, so our equivalent of 1985, the same time as Barbarian Queen happens. Okay, so here's why these are on here, because in 1989, a sequel was made with Wizards of the Lost Kingdom 2, and the opening voiceover tells us that there's 3 kingdoms, but none of them are Axholm, where the first film took place. Mr. Mushnik is here as a wizard who is tasked with ending the reign of 3 evil sorcerers.
An old man. I've never seen an old man before.
Me neither! Certainly not every time I look in the mirror. Melvin is here, and Caedmon is tasked with teaching him to be a wizard, and they come across Cain, or Bill, or Frankenstein, or whatever you want to go with there. And then they face, like, monkey men and various battles, but then they meet Amethea, who says that she's from Veneer, and has been thrown out of her kingdom, and is now on the run. So it's likely that this happens after Barbarian Queen. And it's really strange that this character from another film, 1 year before her own sequel, in a movie that may or may not be a sequel, shows up here in a more consistent manner. Later on, Captain Spaulding shows up as the villainous Donar, and the Dark One joins them, and they eventually face off against the Protector, and Tyor figures out how to use his powers and kills Donar, leaving only Zars, so the kid uses magic to boost his strength and kill him. And they name Amethea and her fellow warrior Erman King and Queen, and Tylor is named the new Grand Wizard. Again, no way to really date this in time frame here, so we'll just put it in equivalent of Fantasy World real-time 1989, 4 years after Barbarian Queen. So hey, 4 movies. That one was more than I expected, really. I didn't really plan for that to be that long. And these are fun. I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff, and these really entertained me. Lana Clarkson was great here, and her story, it's just a bit too tragic, but these films stand as a fun testament to her talents. Here's another one that I started a while ago and just never finished for whatever reason. Again, this is one that I don't know why I stopped, but it's Zapped. I watched the first one ages ago when I wrote the script, but I never finished with the second one. So let's do it now. Let's watch Zapped. We start this all back in 1982 with Zapped, which gives us Charles here, who seems to be in charge of an experiment with a mouse. And Buddy's here too. So I guess I have to look to see which comes first. Oh, yep, it was this. So like, did the producers of the show just like see this movie and were like, these two are amazing together in this sci-fi sex comedy. It's essential we pair them back up for this family sitcom. There's this cheerleader here, and here's another aside. I always get Heather Thomas here confused with Heather Locklear. And Locklear was in Return of the Swamp Thing, playing Abby Arcane, right? So when they did the Swamp Thing TV show a few years later, they cast Heather Thomas as Dr. Arcane's wife, which doesn't make me any less confused. Dick Halloran is here, and okay, he spills the plant grow into the cannabis extract, but then Bible Man adds beer to it. So if you're following along at home, a formula that would increase plant growth, combined with weed and beer, and if dropped, produces a gas that knocks you out. Barney's parents are kinda dicks, and there's a girl doing a story on his orchids named Bernadette. And Captain Kirk's son is here too, and so is Zed's girlfriend. Soon, Barney discovers that he can move things with his mind, and the absolute best use of that power is to expose bosoms. His secret is soon revealed, but I guess part of telekinesis is also making toys able to, like, phase through glass or something, and also to freak out his mother. And hey, it's the high school from Nightmare on Elm Street. He uses his powers to help his baseball team out, and how in the hell is Erwin Keyes gonna be a high school kid? Like, dude was 30 when they made this. So let's talk about this scene for a second, because this film originally was going to be fairly tame. But after Porky's was a huge hit, they decided to throw more nudity and sexuality into this one.
This entire segment was shot after they were done filming just for more nudity, and it includes Jewel Shepard and possibly Michelle Bauer. Like it's hard to tell because it looks like her, but she's not in the credits. But the actress who played this role also isn't in the credits, and Michelle was active at this point, but mostly making adult features. So I'm actually asking, is this her? And here's another silly note. The poster of the film ran as the ad in the newspapers and managed to get multiple complaints, but not because of the nudity, because there isn't any. But they were concerned that the boys could see the women's panties. To be clear, they were concerned that fictional characters were able to see another fictional character's undergarments. It's got a really weird cameo from Aunt Esther, and then Peyton has Bartney use his powers to win over Jane, which he does by tricking her, then lying to her, and then he takes a photo of her nude without her knowing about it. So, yeah, a real upstanding guy. Barney and Bernadette get together without him manipulating her, even if he does try to lift her shirt with his powers, but it looks like she was going to take it off anyway. A couple of cars in the lot have registration stickers for California in 1982, so it looks like that's our year, and Eddie Deason is here to add to the overall creepy vibe. On prom night, Jane and Peyton are crowned king and queen, but of course Jane makes that horrible offense of not being into Peyton when he tries to grab all over her. So of course he then shows that nude photo of her to everyone, and I think we're supposed to think that Peyton is the good guy here and oh so charming, but like I'm on Team Jane here. Oh, and also Heather Thomas had no clue that they were A, going to show a photo of her superimposed over another nude model's body, and B, have a body double show her nude breasts, so she was pretty pissed off, as you can imagine. As such, they put this credit into the end. Jane throws a watermelon which hits Barney in the head, prompting him to go carry on everyone, and he takes Jane's dress off, and Peyton chases her, and again I ask, what is he planning to do if he catches her? Barney's rampage mostly consists of making everyone lose their clothes, and I guess this causes everyone to become like rape demons or something. Like what was going to happen here? These guys are approaching the ladies in a menacing fashion, enough for them to have to kick them away. The B-man is hit on the head and knocked out and says he lost his powers, but that appears to have just been for Peyton's sake, as he then flies away. It took 8 long years for a sequel to show up with 1990's Zapped Again, and we have Kevin here starting his first day at a new school, and it's Ralph Waldo Emerson High, the same school, although at a different shooting location. And little Reagan is here, and Kevin immediately rubs the jock boys the wrong way. He meets up with the Destroyer and Miss Barnhart here, the only returning character and actor from the original, and she's now the principal. And he gets a job at a hot dog joint and meets Lucy, played by Kelly Williams, who had several very long runs on major TV shows that I have not seen because I do not do like lawyer shows. And I should note that Kevin doesn't get along with the jocks because he keeps hitting on one of their girlfriends repeatedly, even though she's not that into it, right in front of them. And again, I think we're supposed to think that's all okay. He joins the science club and the wizard master is here, and he says a couple of years ago someone fried their brains and ripped girls' clothes off at the prom, referencing the first film, and they find a hidden stash behind a wall. It's prune juice with Barney's name on it, and the jocks force him to drink it. Sure enough, soon after, he starts to gain powers, and his first inclination is to expose women, including his teacher. It seems Miss Mitchell was at the prom from the first film and recognizes the look Kevin gave before using his power, and then Miss Barnhart has this hunky boys calendar, and the days match up with the year 1989. And this is the beginning of the school year, so I suppose we're in the fall of '89. Kevin reveals his powers to Lucy, and unlike the first movie, the powers wear off in time unless you drink more of the prune juice. And here's something weird. Kevin challenges the jocks to the big school penguin race, and this guy says that the jock team has won it since 1947. But then, this sign says it's the 13th annual penguin race, which is weird because this would have at least had to have been the 40th annual if it's been going since like 47. Like if this is 1989, this should be at a minimum
the 42nd one. And you may say, well, maybe they don't do it every year. Hey, they called it the 13th annual penguin race. And I love that during the race, the jocks shake Lucy off this platform and they get all mad and are like, hey, that's cheating. Dude, you're using telefreaking kinesis to win this, so maybe chill on all that. Lucy drinks some too and gets the power as well, and strangely doesn't feel the need to just go making boys' clothes fall off. And there's a substitute teacher that should be teaching about Zuni doll defense. And Kevin and Lucy finally get together, and wow, the whole telekinesis aspect of this one is really just like a side story, huh? On the night of homecoming, they decide to get revenge on Wayne by spiking the hot dogs with itching powder instead of, telekinesis. But Kevin is allergic to tomatoes, but there's only one bottle of prune juice left, and they get it to him just in time for him to make everyone throw them at Wayne. And then everyone itches, so Kevin forces Wayne to take the fall for everything by making him beat himself up and admit that he framed the science club. But she still knows Kevin was responsible for making everyone itch, but I guess is off the hook for that? The movie then ends with, I'm gonna call it a music video, but only under protest.
And I knew for a fact I was gonna get zapped. I gotta have it.
And there's that, the zapped mini timeline. And I guess they have continuity, more than I thought that they would, to be honest. And the first is still pretty damn fun. It's not great, but it's a good time. And it's kind of less rapey than I expected it to be. Like, honestly, I mean, for a movie about a dude who can strip people, he's pretty reserved. Buddy, or Peyton, not so much. The second movie, though, you could probably skip that one. Next up is one of the oldest scripts that I have, and it's The Exterminator. Like, I did this one 4 years ago, and I just figured that no one would be that interested because it's not that terribly well known, but there's some fun stuff going on here, so I'm glad that I finally get to talk about it. We begin back in 1980 with The Exterminator, and the beginning is set in Vietnam during the war, and John is captured along with his friend Kung Fu Joe. They manage to escape, though, and the film then jumps to years later in New York, and both Eastland and Jefferson are working at a shipping yard. There's some hoodlums here, including Erwin Keyes, and after a fight, they track down Michael and paralyze him, so John decides to track them down. He somehow just has a flamethrower, because that's something that people just have, I guess, and also an M16. He uses it to confront the gang and shoots two, but leaves one tied up in the basement where his face is munched on by rats. Christopher George is here 1 year before he would grace the world with the most artfully acted death scene in film history. More on that in a bit. And would seem like John's vengeance is complete, but then he finds out that the warehouse is being shaken down by the local mob, so he locates one of the mob bosses and kidnaps him in an attempt to steal his money, eventually dropping him down into a meat grinder. The brood mom appears as a nurse, and oh hey, the John from Frankenhooker also plays a John here. Like, this guy gets typecast. And on the streets, the movie Firepower is playing, which was 1979, so that could be our year. And John continues his vigilante actions, killing the guys who hurt a prostitute and traffic kids, and his actions are noticed by the police and press, who dub him the Exterminator. Michael asks John to pull his plug, which he does, which gives Detective Dalton the last bit of the puzzle he needs to figure out John's secret, which leads to a face-off between the two. But the CIA are involved, and they want to kill John privately without bringing him in and shoot them both. But John manages to survive, now thought dead. So there's no conclusive date in the film, so we're just going to go ahead and use that 1979 movie to place it there. There was a sequel 4 years later in 1984 with The Exterminator 2, and it opens with a gang robbing a liquor store and killing the elderly clerks, only to be met in the alley by a man with a flamethrower who burns them all. Like, dude, you're really in the alley? Like, if you could have come inside a few minutes earlier, you could have done a lot more. And the news says that the Exterminator has returned. And there's a gang, including, Erwin Keyes again, Like, he was confirmed alive in the last film, but they said a part of his face was eaten by rats, so I guess that's why he's scarred a bit, although his character has a different name. Like, it's a bit confusing, but Keyes has stated that he was playing it as if he were the same character. Our main villain may get eaten by a Caribbean shark, and there's a newspaper here with the headline about the US invading Grenada, which happened in 1983, so that's presumably when this is set. 4 years later. John's back and he has a girlfriend now, and oh, X just has this hair now? His gang starts a crime spree, and you know, back in the 80s, we were promised that gangs would dress like this, but they, did not. Coconut Sid is here too, and oh man, there's like 4 different names I could call Frankie Faison. And unlike the last movie where John used a bunch of different weapons and only used that flamethrower to threaten one guy, here it's his primary weapon. Him and BG are old friends, and X is in league with the old school mob, and John goes to work as a garbage man, falling in love with Caroline. But oh no, X's men attack them in the park, and they break Caroline's leg, hurting her career as a dancer. And oh, X's hair is back to this look. And the boys go into full gear, using the garbage truck as BG joins in on John's crusade. They head off to break up the meeting with the mob and street gang, and okay, back to this hairstyle, I guess, and leads to a big confrontation with plenty of explosions. And BG is killed, and so are the mob guys. But they kill Caroline as well. John goes to take them all on with the truck and a bunch of machine guns, and of course, a flamethrower. So John and X one-on-one, and here's a fun fact. This movie had a massive amount of reshoots, and the first cut had only one scene where John uses the flamethrower, and it was this one right here. And every single other instance of him using it were shot later. And that's not even Robert Ginty under that mask. The reshoots used a stunt double, and in the original version, Caroline didn't die, so it's a double in that shot as well. But originally, she's the one who takes out X. But here, instead, he's just blown up, and John walks away alone again. So there you have it, The Exterminator. And it sort of has a continuity, but again, not really. The second film is just so weird to watch and interesting to try to figure out what was shot when in terms of those reshoots, but both of these are good watches. I enjoyed them both. Like, neither is great, but they're fun 80s action trash, just the way I like them. So this next one I didn't expect to be as long as it was. I said, oh hey, let's do The Gods Must Be Crazy. There's only 2 of those, and I grabbed the movies ages ago. But then I found out it was not nearly as simple as that, which is probably why I never went ahead and did the video. But you know how sometimes you guys out there say, I had no idea that there was that many of those? This is one of those times. Things got crazy back in 1982 with The Gods Must Be Crazy, although it was first released in South Africa back in 1980. But weirdly, it didn't do well in the US in 82. But it was re-released here in 84, where it would become a massive hit. It starts almost like a documentary film about a tribe in the Kalahari, and it's told that they're very isolated, unaware of the rest of the world. Their language is a series of clicking sounds, and they're 600 miles away from the nearest city, and one day a passing airplane drops out a bottle of Coke, because once upon a time, all colas came in these glass bottles. G takes it back to his tribe, but none of them know what it is. They think it's a gift from the gods. But when fights break out over it, they try to give it back, leading to further injury. G decides to get rid of it, declaring it an evil thing, and wants to throw it off the end of the earth. And meanwhile, a group of guerrillas try to assassinate the president as the military attempts to close in on them. There's also Stein here doing tests on elephant poop, and he's asked to go and pick up the new town school teacher. And after a series of mishaps with comically sped up film, he does. Eventually, she meets up with them and tries to give them the bottle, but they tell him he must throw it away himself, and Kate arrives at the village. The Bushman gets into trouble with the authorities and gets shot and goes to court where they say that it is 1980 and he gets a sentence of 3 months. But Stein agrees to take him on as a tracker to serve out his prison time. But the terrorists take over Kate's school and take everyone captive. Stein and his partner Mpudi and Shi team up to rescue everyone using tiny tranquilizer darts to incapacitate the baddies, and they manage to save everyone. With his prison term done, Ji heads off to finish his quest, and Kate and Andrew get together. Ji gets to the end of the world, a cliff face, and tosses the bottle away before heading home to his family. It took until 1989 for a sequel to arrive with The Gods Must Be Crazy 2, and they changed Ji's name to Kiko, and he is telling them about when he went to look for the end of the earth, and his sons encounter a couple of poachers and get stuck on their truck. Then there's an American lawyer named Ann Taylor, who I suppose left her loft to go to a conference in Africa, where she meets pilot Steven, and they end up in the middle of a storm and run out of gas. So he, and follow me here, pours a bottle of scotch into the tank and it starts up again. Would that work? They become trapped in the desert while Kiko tracks his kids by following the tire marks and, oh no, not the honey badger. That crazy nasty ass honey badger, he just don't care. Ann meets a kid with a bike. I mean, at least I think it's as a kid. This is his voice.
Look, I'll give you money. I give you money, you give me the bike.
And then Kiko gets wrapped in a conflict between two soldiers. And it's basically several different plots all running alongside each other. And around the 1 hour mark, they start to come together as Ann encounters Kiko and the soldiers. And eventually they catch up to the poachers who take them all captive. They escape and Kiko's reunited with his children while Ann and Steven return to civilization. There's no date on this one, so I guess real-time 89. Like it's odd because this was shot in 85, but it sat on a shelf unreleased for several years, so technically I guess it would be real-time 1985. Okay, here's where it gets weird because that's all that America saw, but there were several unofficial sequels, starting with 1991's The Gods Must Be Crazy 3, otherwise known as Crazy Safari, which was only released in Hong Kong. In China, there's an auction for a Chinese mummy, but it's a Jiangxi, and we get a primer on how they work. They hop and can be kept in place with this parchment on their forehead, and it's Ching Yang Lam from the Mr. Vampire movies, and they raise the vampire and intend to take him back home. Kiko is here too, and his tribe is being threatened by thieves, and when their plane goes down, the vampire gets loose. And yes, if you've seen the first movie, and its quaint sort of style, I'm guessing you weren't expecting Chinese hopping vampires to come later, although they do bring back the fire-stomping rhino from the first film. And then there's a series of shenanigans as the two try to track down the vampire in the bush, teaching the tribe kung fu, and they find him, but the diamond thieves are still on the prowl, leading to a big showdown in which, and I am not making this up, they call upon the spirit of Bruce Lee to inhabit Kiku to save the day. And they go home with the vampire. And there's no date in this one, so real-time 91, and 11 years have passed for Kiko. 2 years later, China came back for more with 1993's The Gods Must Be Crazy 4, or Crazy Hong Kong. But now, a voiceover tells the character Nick Zhao, which is the actor's name, not the character. But I suppose it's possible that this is shifting continuities. Like, the change apparently happened with the last movie, but since that version had odd dubbing, it's not really noted. Here, Nick Zhao encounters a film crew, and Mindy's dad is in this as a Los Angeles producer, and when the crew once again leaves a Coke bottle, Nick Zhao must return it and goes looking for them, ending up in her luggage and sent to Hong Kong. There he gets involved with stolen diamonds, deals with escalators, and then just has to face all of the technologies that he's never seen before. There's a series of goofy chases with the diamond thieves, showing up the devious Jack, and eventually he is returned home, saying goodbye to his newfound friends and returning the bottle. After returning home, John comes to his village to cook for everyone, and again, no date here, or at least none that I could read, so real-time 93 works. 1 year later, in 94, they kept it going with The Gods Must Be Crazy 5, or The Gods Must Be Funny in China. This one has a track competition that a sign says is in 1994, so I suppose that's our year here. And there's a salesman doing a presentation about Nick Zhao's tribe, and they recruit him to help them win because they want him to train them in the ways of survival in the desert. The race begins at the Great Wall, and they have to navigate the more treacherous areas of the Chinese wilderness, encountering pandas. And again, I say to you, person out there who has only ever seen the first or maybe the first and second one, did you think that a later entry would involve our hero playing baseball against a panda bear? Along the way, there's chimps, sabotage, packs of poodles. The panda rides in a sidecar, and they manage to complete the race while saving the panda at the same time. Now, those were unofficial entries, but there were two more that were even more unofficial. In 1989, there was a South African film called Jewel of the Gods, which stars both Marius Weyers and Sandra Prinsloo, who are in the first film, but they're different characters here, and it's totally unrelated, but was in some places marketed as a follow-up. There was another completely unrelated 1993 film called There's a Zulu on My Step, another South African film, which was released in some places as The Gods Must Be Crazy 4. Side note, the actor Nick Zhao really was a bushman and didn't understand money, but eventually was able to use his fame to bring amenities to his village. He retired from acting in 1994 and returned to being a farmer, but died in 2003 from tuberculosis. So there you have it, 5 freaking movies that don't really have a continuity. They don't really contradict each other or anything, but there's really no connection from film to film, and the first one is still just very charming. It's really fun knowing that Nick Zhao basically was reacting to things for the first time for real, and he helps carry all the films. And I do love the ridiculousness of the third one with the hopping vampires and all, but I'll admit, by the time that I got to like parts 4 and 5, I was ready to be done. But the first one is absolutely worth watching. But I'd say that the rest, that's up to you. So a little while back, I did a poll on what you wanted to see, American Ninja or Enter the Ninja, and American Ninja won, so I did that. But here's the thing, I had already watched and written the Enter the Ninja episode. It's one that I probably could have done as its own thing, but instead, you're getting it here. We entered this franchise back in 1981 with Enter the Ninja, which starts with an extended sequence of a white man in a Storm Shadow cosplay being stalked by a large group of ninja, leading him to a house where he straight up beheads a guy. And he's then revealed as Cole here, who was the original Django. But it was all training? Like that guy didn't die from the throwing star to the face? Like he didn't really cut that guy's head off? Like it's clear that this guy was hit by the star, right? He even has a big bloody mark on his face. He just like took that? How did he not lose an eye here? Cole's induction is opposed by Hasegawa, and he then goes to visit an old friend who sees him both grab his wife's breast and kick her, and he's just kinda cool with it. Frank here is being squeezed out of his land, so he asks Cole to stay with him for protection, and Grandpa from Silent Night, Deadly Night is here, and there's confrontations with the local criminal elements, led by Mr. Venarius, played by classic film star Christopher George from The Exterminator, and they keep trying to force Frank off his property. He keeps refusing, so Venarius sends a goon squad, but Cole and Dollars back him up, and he forces everyone to put their guns down, leading to a big brawl. But like, all those guns are still just sitting there, and the bosses have fled. Just pick up a gun and start firing. Things escalate to the point that they decide to hire a ninja to get him out of there, and he goes to enlist one from an acting agency? And they have a poster up for The Changeling, so we're set after 1980 when that movie came out, and they eventually end up getting Hasegawa, who then goes in and kills Frank, and then burns down the entire village. Cole goes to get revenge, wiping out pretty much everyone, and uses the electro weapons, although I guess some would prefer me to call them the Raphaels. He takes this guy out with a star to the forehead, which we apparently now know only leaves you with a little line on your face. It comes down to Cole and Venarius, who takes a star to the chest and gives us one of the absolute best death scenes in all of cinema. Cole and Hasegawa have a one-on-one with Hassie taking a sword to the gut and then being beheaded. Cole leaves, promising Marianne that he will return, and there's no date here, so real-time 81 works, and oh, is he winking at me? I mean, Cole. This is so sudden. That made a ton of money, so 2 years later, there was a follow-up in 1983 entitled Revenge of the Ninja, and we're in Japan as a bunch of ninja attack a family home, killing everyone. And Hasegawa is here, but isn't he dead? It's his family that's been killed, and his friend Braden helps him fight the soldiers remaining, and his son survives. His name is Cho, though, and yeah, he's a new character now, and they flee to America to avoid the ninjas. Several years pass, and he's already kicking ass, and he's Kane Kosugi, real-life son of actor Sho Kosugi. And Cho has given up being a ninja and has opened a gallery with Braden, but he's in with the mob, and he dons a ninja suit to eliminate their men. Because the deaths and injuries appear to be the work of a ninja, the police consult Cho, who tells us this.
The length of the blade is precise. Only by passing through the gate of the eyes can it reach the brain and kill.
So I guess that guy could have survived that hit in the first movie, but they were really taking a chance there, weren't they? The mob sends guys to trash the gallery, and then there's this thug here done up like a native, and that's Halloween 5 Michael Myers, Don Shanks. And you know, he also played an indigenous character in Grizzly Adams and the old Hulk show, because Don actually is of Cherokee and Illini descent. Sub-Zero pops in, and Braden kills Cho's mom and kidnaps his son, so he suits back up and tries to get revenge. Meanwhile, Kane gets loose on his own and fights the dumbest thug ever. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't have looked, because I imagine it would be cool to see Superman, but come on, dude. Cho and Braden have a face-off on a rooftop, which leads to an amazing dummy drop, and Cho eventually wins, stabbing Braden, and gets his son back. Again, no visible date and no connections to the previous film, so real-time 1983. The trilogy completed 1 year later in 1984 with Ninja 3: The Domination. There's this ninja here attacking people on a golf course, assassinating a man, and just killing anyone that messes with him. After a lengthy standoff, he manages to narrowly escape capture, but the star of Breakin' and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo is here, and she's attacked, and the ninja enchants her, but then dies, but it's apparent that there's side effects. She's an aerobic instructor, and there's a cop on her case that keeps on hitting on her and gets really mad when she says no and yells at her, so she takes him home to bone him. And yeah, that does not work in real life, so don't take this movie's advice. That night, the ninja sword glows, and she has visions of the police who shot the ninja and starts to stalk them. She also has this, I guess, haunted arcade cabinet, and then dons the ninja gear and kills the officer. And whoa, how hairy is this guy? She then starts to hunt down and kill the cops who shot him, while another mysterious ninja, again played by Sho, chases. When they figure out that something weird is going on, they seek the help of David Lopan, and things get very Linda Blair. We learn through flashbacks that the Dark Ninja killed Yamada's sensei, letting us know that this is yet another new character and not Cho from the last one, because, you guessed it, none of these films are connected in any way. In what may be my favorite part, Christy is about to be possessed again, but tries to fight it off by dancing. But the spirit is like, nope, I am not having it. Possessed Christy continues her war against the police, and Yamada faces off against her and tells Billy that they need the sword, and the Black Ninja finds his own body, and he's able to transfer his soul back into it to revive. The two fight it out, and Christy reverts to normal, and she helps out by stabbing the baddie in their big fight, and he literally what-a-worlds it right into the ground. He's not dead, though, until Yamada jams a knife directly into his head, And again, there's no date and no connection, so whatever, Real Time 84, and that would close out the series. So there you go, 3 movies that are not linked in the slightest except for one actor that appears in all 3 and the word ninja in the title. And these are fun, but I will confess, not as fun as I remember them. The third one with the possession was probably the biggest blast of the bunch just because of the silliness, but I kind of have this memory of these being more over the top than they actually are. They're worth watching though, as they have some fun stuff going on. Here's another horror mini timeline that I just never really found a spot for. It's one that I probably would have found a slot for eventually, but ultimately I think it's best it goes here, and it's the Reeker films. These are definitely more obscure, but not extremely so let's see if their continuity stinks. Things got a little smelly back in 2005 with Reeker, with a family traveling and being attacked by something, and then this guy Trip is meeting his dealer, who is one of the crows. There's a poster up for a Bill Viola performance from 2002, so we're past that, and a group of students is headed out to the desert for a rave, including Hostel Guy and Jack here, who is blind. Tripper is being chased by the dealer who he stole from, and everywhere that they go ends up being empty and abandoned. They get a partial radio signal that says that the roads are closed, so they're stuck overnight in an old hotel, and they encounter dead versions of the family from the beginning. But Radford is here too, and there's a weird smell that starts a wafting. But then, oh hey, Colonel Rackzack rolls in looking for his wife, and they run into my favorite named character in a while, like he's actually listed in the credits as half a trucker. Henry says that he's seen a bunch of people who are already dead, but he gets taken by a bunch of wavy lines, and then a monster, and something attacks Cookie with some sort of spinning thing, and then kills her. The weird smell and heat wave effect happens before it attacks, with Nelson getting taken out next, and they face off against the Reeker, which is this clouded dude with that hazy effect hand, one arm that he switches out into death tools. Jack gets drilled seeing the Reeker's exposed face, and Gretchen fights back, running him over and into the RV, and she drives off with an injured Jack, but the dude keeps coming, and they crash. It turns out that instead, the crew were in a big crash with the RV, and the Reeker didn't kill anyone, and Henry had a heart attack while driving and crashed into our group, and this whole thing was a sort of purgatory, and Radford is actually the one that helped out. Gretchen and Jack live, and there's no date, but all the technology is mid-2000s, so real-time 05 works. 3 years later, a sequel was released in 2008 with No Man's Land, The Rise of Reeker, and it starts in 1978 with a guy running over a drifter, and he hears voices, and a police officer shows up chaining him up, but he cuts his own hand off to get away, but then surrenders, leading to his execution. It then jumps to what it says is now, so possibly present day 08, and the sheriff is now retiring. And Veronica Mars guy is here, and there's a little diner out in the desert, and a trio of crooks arrive, including that dude from Go. And they get into a standoff with the law guys here, and there's an earthquake that affects everyone's communications, and there's a cop car with a registration sticker on the plate with the color for 2008. So that's likely our year. But then they're in an office a little while later on, and there's a calendar up on the wall that says it's 2007. So that would appear to be right. And judging from how the days line up, it's either January or October of that year. Of course, weird stuff starts to happen with dead folks showing up, a comet comes crashing down, and there's an invisible wall keeping them in the area. And soon, they realize that the Reeker is there, who now has a flamethrower. But this time, they actually figure out that they're in a state between life and death, and the attacks continue, as the sheriff reveals that it's the killer from the beginning. And he's working for death now, collecting the souls of those who are supposed to die, but are stuck in the in-between. But he's soon caught and killed. With only Maya and Alex left, they face off against Riki and blow him up, and the explosion is revealed to be the real cause of what killed everyone, much like the crash in the first film. Maya survives, as does Harris, and the finale lets us know that the voices have chosen another one to continue the job. And that's that. 2 movies that are linked, I guess, but don't share continuity. Like if you see the second one without seeing the first, you probably wouldn't notice. And I like these. They're entertaining. They're not great or anything, but they're fun little stories. If you haven't seen them, they're probably worth a watch if you go in with low expectations. This is our last comedy series of the bunch, and it's one that I did just for this video. I had the movies in my collection for a while and had been meaning to rewatch them, and it's the Splash series. And this is probably another one that you may be like, hey, there's a sequel? And yes, there is. So let's see if it holds water. Okay, we first hit the water back in 1984 with Splash, which starts off in Cape Cod and says it's 20 years ago, and a band is playing Wooly Bully, a song that was released in 1964. So that's the earliest that this can be. Young Alan is here with his family, including his creepster brother Freddie, and then just randomly jumps into the water and encounters a mermaid. He's then saved and goes to present day, although it says this morning, and Alan has now gotten big without Zoltar's help, and he runs a produce business along with Freddie, who's now Uncle Buck, and he has a bunch of penthouses that he says are current, and they're the June 1983 issue, so that may be our year? If that's true, then perhaps the opening was 1963, and Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs were still performing Wooly Bully before recording it, and this is them, like, practicing on a boat? Alan's girlfriend breaks up with him, and after a series of drunken escapades, he ends up in Cape Cod, where he has a boating accident, but is rescued by a mysterious woman who is naked. So very naked. No matter how much Disney tried to pretend that she wasn't for a while. Yup, when this one first premiered on Disney Plus, they tried to cover her butt with digital hair, but soon after changed it back because people complained and because it looked silly. It turns out that the woman is a mermaid, and she's spotted by Johnny Rose, and look at how annoyed that she is with this turtle here. Like, the dude is just swimming past on his turf, and that's worthy of an eye roll. Like, oh god, here's that turtle again, trying to take a peek at my boobs. Alan's wallet has a registration from the DMV that either was issued in August of '83 or expires then, and he has a wacky secretary. And at the Statue of Liberty, the tour guide says that she's been there for a century, and it was installed in 1886, but he's probably approximating. It's not like exactly 100 years. El Driver gets arrested for being naked, and they're reunited, and he takes her back to his place. The next day, she goes to Bloomingdale's and learns English from watching TV, and The Outsiders is at a theater, which came out in 1983, as well as 10 to Midnight and Max Dugan Returns, both also '83, so that's looking to be the year. Especially because another theater has Lone Wolf McQuade, also '83, and then Raiders of the Lost Ark, which came out in 1981, but was re-released in '83, so that's a lock. And hey, Alan, what's the deal, man? Your girl hears a couple of guys on the street just jamming some music, and she wants to dance with them, and this is your reaction?
Hi. We better go, hon, or else we'll be late.
Huh. Wonder what it was about those guys that made him so uncomfortable. There's then the coolest double feature I could imagine going on in this theater with Evil Dead and Extro. So how badass is that? But next door, I guess you get a triple feature of The Mistress, Skin Tight, and Sweet Cheeks, also all fine cinema. They name her Madison, and she says that she only has 6 days before she has to return home. And the deleted scene explains that she made a deal with a sea witch to have the ability to form legs for 1 week, but if she didn't return to the sea in that time, it was irreversible. But that was cut, so it's not canon. Kornbluth becomes obsessed with revealing the mermaid to the world by getting her wet, and Alan convinces Madison to marry him in an effort to get her to stay. Unfortunately, before that can happen, she's sprayed by a hose and everyone sees her tail, and she's taken away. As the final proof, there's a newspaper dated March of 1983, and Alan, Freddie, and Kornbluth break in to save her. They manage to get away, and Madison says she can never come back. She offers Alan a chance to come with her because when he's with her, he'll be safe under the water because she was their mermaid from when he was a kid. But she says that if he does, he can never come back. He decides at the last minute to go with her, and they swim off together under the sea as they head up to this massive, shiny underwater city. Things got weird then because 4 years later, in 1988, there was a sequel called Splash 2 with a T-O-O. So for some reason, in the beginning, Alan and Madison are not in that undersea city. They live on an island. Alan misses his old life, but I guess somehow she has the ability to just look at New York, which is something she can just do now.
I used to be able to do this before I came to your world. And then I couldn't. Till now.
Freddy's back too, but oh yeah, everyone is recast because this was just a made-for-TV movie. And the produce company is in trouble, but Alan can never go back because remember the end of the last movie when Madison said that if they leave, they can never go back.
We can go back.
Oh. Okay. I guess so much for that. So they go back and are reunited.
Alan's, the white Bill Cosby.
Madison, don't drink anything he gives you. Mrs. Stimler is back, the only returning cast member, and Freddy bought an old investment house in Queens. And Alan is real mad about that, but I guarantee that property goes for around $2 million now. And it's then a bunch of sitcom cliches with a nosy neighbor, and then a storyline about a captive dolphin. But then the great Mark Blankfield shows up, and it's funny because this is Splash 2 with an O-O, and he was previously in The Jerk 2, another TV sequel with a T-O-O. They decide to rescue the dolphin and at one point have a big fight, and they eventually free it, taking out the villainous Dr. Bennis, and they return Salty to the ocean. Alan and Madison then just decide to stay there and live on the land. So yeah, just forget about the ending of the last movie, I guess. And they don't have a date visible on this one, but the poster for the movie says 4 years ago, a man and a mermaid swam away with your heart. So it seems like this is 4 years later and would be set in 1987 then. So yeah, 2 movies and a complete disregard for continuity. It's actually frustrating that the sequel completely throws away the entire ending of the last one. But I guess what do you want for a cheap TV sequel? And I really enjoy the first one. It still holds up after all these years. But yeah, you can just avoid that follow-up. Like there's really no need to watch it. And it kind of flips the bird to the first one. So just stay away. Last horror franchise here, and it's one that could probably be its own episode. But it's one that I figure is way too obscure to feature. But you know, it turns out it does have a timeline, and it's the Fear Footage trilogy. And we're in the home stretch here, getting close to the end, so let's just jump right in. We're kicking off in 2018 with the Fear Footage, and we're told that the footage is from a recovered police officer body cam, and it's from April of 2016. And we're told that a house that was destroyed a year ago has magically reappeared. That went to investigate was never seen again. We're then shown the footage as the officer enters the house and finds a number of video cassettes, and hey, what movie is this? Is this a VHS sequel that I'm unaware of? Well, on the tape is something called Birthday Party, and it's this kid's birthday tomorrow, but oh no, creepy clowns are around. And what do you know, there's one right outside. The kid tries telling his mom, but she won't believe him, and hey kid, you have it on video, just show her. The mom disappears, and oh hey, red balloons and clowns. Never seen that before. Turns out his mom is dead, and then he's just like led away, like the end. Sure. We're then back in the house, and I love that the cop was just like, checking out this house, might as well watch this whole video. He then finds a diary with an entry from 2015, and it talks about an evil tape, and the little girl talks about killing her parents. And it's from 1 year ago when the house supposedly burnt down. And oh, another video, might as well watch. This one's called Storm Stalkers, and these two guys are chasing a superstorm and hit a guy, but then a cult shows up and they get chased into a maze where a really silly monster attacks them, and the cult has a ceremony. The end. And the cop, again, watched that whole thing. And then, no shock, another tape. This one called Speak No Evil, and this guy hears strange sounds in the woods at night, and there's a story of a crazy pastor that killed a bunch of kids a while back and then vanished, and after hearing some spooky sounds out back, he goes outside, and the pastor's church has appeared, and dude is revealed to be his son, I guess, and boo! Meanwhile, cop guy realizes he's trapped in the house and spooky stuff starts happening, including a pretty cool monster and some nice visuals. Like the last 10 minutes of this movie are better than every other thing in this film combined. But then it just ends. They get the cop. Didn't see that coming. That was followed up 2 years later with The Fear Footage 2: Curse of the Tape. We're told that the footage this time is from 2019 and this guy is back, but he says that the guy in the first movie isn't him. He says that he doesn't know how he's on that footage from the first film and seeks out other people that were on the tape and meets up with the Stormstalker guys, and he recaps the story of the house and the girl, Megan. They get irate for a reason and storm off like they just saw a videotape with the two of them on it, and their reaction is to just get mad. But then James has a change of heart, and they want to go to try to find the tape that the Megan girl said she watched in her diary. And it's an old cabin that they rent, and they ask around to find out the story of what happened and meet up with the cop from the first movie's wife. That night, there's something in the woods that attacks James, and he ends up Blair Witching. And as the nights go on, they hear things and make a map of all the murders in the area that make the design from the cult in the Storm Chaser short, and the center leads to a cemetery, so they go there. There's a house there, and there's missing posters with that 2019 date on it, and after they argue a whole lot, they decide to stay one more night. That night, the cop from the first movie appears as a demon thing, and at 3 a.m. the house from the first movie appears, so of course he goes in, and of course becomes trapped, but jumps out a window. He's then just attacked and I guess killed. The end. We then move on to 2021's The Fear Footage 3 a.m., which begins with telling us that we're back in Maryland and another guy has gone missing named Dennis in 2020. We established that, like the last one, the Fear Footage movies were actual releases, so he goes to try to find out if they're real. He visits Dark Bluff, finding old houses, and they're all abandoned, and while exploring, he gets lost on a road, and his truck disappears. There's dead birds everywhere, and eventually, after wandering around for a while, he finds a house that he goes into for the night. There's tapes here from 1990, and he hears spooky sounds and is chased by some sort of creature, and the next day finds a tent with information about the cult's ceremonies. He runs into the other Storm Chaser guy, who then promptly kills himself, and Dennis sees a note saying that once you're on the tape, you can't escape. And after much just sort of walking around, a door shows up. He goes through that door, and yep, in the house. It lets him out, but then David is here, still alive I guess, and he says that there's a way out, and it's across a bridge. And there's missing posters for all the characters we've seen so far, but now there's one for Dennis. And he goes back to the house and finds the original tape, and a bunch of things chase him around, with him ending up in the basement, and finds that original tape. But the cult appears and chases him, and he's hit by a car, and it's revealed that he's the guy that was hit way back in the first movie in the Stormstalker sequence that got those guys stuck there in the first place. That's it for the horror franchises, and that's 3 movies that are surprisingly well linked. The storylines all intermix, and you know what? I admire the effort to kind of weave a story here. Like, the first one seemed like it was gonna do the whole VHS thing, but then they found a way to tie that into their greater storyline, so that's well done. But I'll also say that the execution is not great. They get a bit monotonous and dull, so even though they were a touch better than I was expecting, I still don't think they were all that great. And here we go, our final timeline, and I figured I should do something a bit bigger here. And this is one that I did exclusively for this video. I had this in my list to cover eventually, and I thought it might be a fun way to close this out, and it's Smokey and the Bandit. Let's check out this classic series, our final one of the video, and see if we can catch that damn bandit. We kicked this off back in 1977 with Smokey and the Bandit from Hal Needham, who also directed the Cannonball Run movies. So there's these two guys, Big Enos and his son Little Enos, and Little Enos might give the Phantom of the Paradise a hard time. And they enlist Jack Horner in a bet, and he has to drive 400 cases of Coors beer from Texarkana to Atlanta within 28 hours. And that's illegal to do and considered bootlegging. So he enlists country singer Jerry Reed as Cletus by going into his bedroom and kinda mounting him. Bandit gets that trademark car and they start off on their journey getting the beer, but along the way he picks up Mrs. Gump. But there's trouble in the form of Ralph Cramden as Buford T. Justice, lawman. And here's their plan. Bandit and his car drive really fast ahead of the truck in order to act as a diversion and blocker for the shipment. Cops chase him and leave Cletus alone. And he and Buford encounter each other, get into a big chase, which includes like bridge jumping, stopping off in a diner, and I wonder what this extra here is talking about. Seems Frog was meant to marry Buford's son and ran out on the wedding, and there's a couple of highway patrol cars with a registration sticker on their plates that expire in December of '76. So it would seem that that's our year here. And then there's a series of shenanigans and truckers, and I guess it's worth noting that Sally Fields and Burt Reynolds were a couple at the time, and they were together for years, and they make it to Georgia. But it looks like they're not gonna make it, although they managed to bust through and get to the fairgrounds, deliver the truck, and make a clean getaway. But they're challenged to get to Boston in 18 hours as a double or nothing. So that was a huge hit. Huge. It was the #2 movie of the year after Star Wars. So, of course, a sequel was ordered. And that came in 1980 with Smokey and the Bandit 2. 3 years later. Big and Little Enos are back running for governor of Texas, but they're up against the Big Lebowski, and they just dump stuff on each other. And Cletus is back as well, and the boys enlist him to get a shipment from Miami to deliver to Texas. Bandit has bottomed out because Frog left him, but he agrees for the run. And meanwhile, Buford is back and Junior is getting married again, and it's Carrie again. She leaves him at the altar again, and they say that it's been 8 months since she and Bandit split. So we're at least that long after the last one, and they brought him a new Trans Am, and then head out on the road, picking up the cargo from Miami, which turns out to be a freaking elephant. Buford and Junior are back after them, and they end up at football practice with Terry Bradshaw and Mean Joe Green, and they call them the Champions. So they've just won a Super Bowl, which would be in either 79 or 80 then. And when they need a doctor to take care of Charlotte, the elephant, they call on Dun Dun Dun, Captain Chaos. They start towards Texas with the law close behind, but Charlotte is pregnant, and Buford enlists the help of his two brothers, Gaylord and Reggie. And yeah, this gets weird. It leads to a big face-off in the desert between a bunch of cop cars and truckers, with the trucks smashing all the popo, and with Charlotte about to give birth, they take her to a reserve, with Bandit giving up the money for her to do so. Carrie and Bandit get back together, and Buford is still on the chase, and this one doesn't show a date, so we'll roll with real-time 1980, 4 years after the last one. 3 years later, in 1983, the trilogy was completed with the very weird Smokey and the Bandit Part 3. With the intro telling us that once upon a time, Buford was after the bandit and shows us clips of the first two films, and oh boy is the story of this one wild. Gleason returns as Justice, as do the Enoses and Junior, and they challenge him to a race. They meet up at a boat called the Monkey Business, and oh yes, this is that boat. The boat that ended an entire political career. So the challenge is that he has to transport this stuffed shark from Florida over to Texas, and they head out. The Enoses keep stalling them with traps along the way, but Justice evades them all, so they call Cletus, and convince him to act like the bandit. And they have an encounter with the Klan, and Buford makes fun of them, which I guess means he had a change of heart, because the first film went out of the way to let us know that he was fairly racist. Snowman dons the hat, and here's the weird bit. Originally, this film was called Smokey is the Bandit, and there's different accounts of what was meant to be. What we do know is that originally Jerry Reed wasn't supposed to come back. He wasn't in the cast list when they announced the film. It's said that the original intention was to have Gleason play both roles, and he would take the part of Buford, but would also play the bandit. When they showed this to test audiences, they were extremely confused why Burt Reynolds wasn't in the movie and Gleason was playing two different characters, and they hated it. So they reshot all the bits with Gleason as the bandit with Reed and simply overdubbed the bit earlier where the Enuses asked him to impersonate him. Any footage of this version doesn't seem to exist, but there's at least a photo with Jackie in Bert's costume. But there's nothing out there that definitely confirms this. The only debatable proof is a teaser trailer entitled Smokey is the Bandit, where he says he's putting himself in the bandit's place and describes his outfit, saying he's become his worst enemy. Now, this account has been contradicted by others who say that the title is just reflective of the plot, and that the fact that Buford is now the one trying to complete a race challenge, and that is him fulfilling the role of the bandit, and that's all that they meant by that. And that the reshoots were to add Jerry Reed posing as the bandit, but they weren't to replace Jackie filling the role. None of this has been officially confirmed by anyone, though, so it's all still hypothetical at this point. But I will admit, the former one with the test audience and the reshooting of Jackie Gleason as the bandit seems to be the more likely, but who knows? Kirkland Tackleberry is here, and they take the fish, so of course, chases ensue. They end up in a nudist colony.
Give me the good old days, when a pair of boobs were a couple of dumb guys.
What does this mean? Boobs have always been boobs. At what point of existence did referring to a pair of boobs not mean breasts and exclusively meant that you were talking about dummies? As they reach the finish line, Cletus lets Buford get the fish so he can complete the job, and when he spots them, we get a brief appearance by Reynolds, and he decides not to retire and continues chasing the bandit. Now, there's no visible dates here or any clues really, so we'll just go with real time 1983. So that was it for the movies, but 11 years later, in 1994, there was a series of 4 made-for-TV films that spun off. They consisted of Bandit Goes Country, Bandit Bandit, Beauty and the Bandit, and Bandit's Silver Angel. They were syndicated and ran on various basic cable stations and featured actor Brian Bloom as the bandit, and the 4 films would serve as prequels to the theatrical ones. They featured Christopher Atkins, Kathy Ireland, Tony Curtis, and Tracy Lords, and were actually all directed by Hal Needham, the director of the first 2 films, making Part 3 the only entry that he wasn't in charge of. Also, a new TV series was announced back in 2020 with a David Gordon Green written plot, but nothing has been said since, so that may be dead. So, there you have it. 50 movies. Actually, I think that was more. I went over, but I'm sure you guys don't mind. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I'll keep this short since this video is overlong anyhow. But please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed this epicness here. Subscribe to the channel. Let's get up to 100,000. Maybe I'll do another video like this at 100,000. Maybe not 100 movies, though. I don't think that's happening. And also, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel. But of course, you do support this channel just by watching the video and sharing it out to your friends. So please do that, and I'll see you very shortly for another great one. Thanks, guys. Thanks for 50,000. Bye-bye.